Chapter 1689. Ha was wearing a long black robe that was wrapped tightly around his body. On the broad road, he walked slowly. He kept walking, even though the road ahead of him was extremely dangerous and difficult. He never gave up, all for the true love in his heart. Yes, true love. He had wanted to ask Bufang to help him, but after careful consideration, he gave up on asking Bufang to help him. It was already good enough that Bufang had brought him to the chaos space. As for the rest of the matter, let him settle it himself. There were many things that could not be helped by outsiders. In the distance, it was a vast city. This was the city outside the temple of heaven god Samsara. In the chaos space, Nether King Ha was really too weak. He also wanted to improve his cultivation base, but the speed of his cultivation base's improvement was already very fast. After entering the city, Era quickly wrapped himself up tighter. He reached out of the black robe, picked up a spicy strip, and stuffed it into his mouth. After sucking the spicy strip for a while, the lingering taste on his tongue and lips made Nether King Ha deeply obsessed. It was a feeling of ecstasy. Next, he had to work hard to find the woman he loved. After entering the city, Era kept walking as if he were drifting with the current. Soon, he asked some people about her with a smile. For this, he did not even hesitate to put up with other people's supercilious looks. With his hot temper, how could he put up with other people's supercilious looks? If it were not for the love in his heart, he might have made a big fuss. While others looked at him with disgust and disdain, Era walked and stopped. The people in this city were extremely arrogant. They looked down on his strength and did not take him seriously at all. Even when he tried to talk to a 7-year-old child with a spicy strip, the child's parents chased him down several streets. He was physically and mentally exhausted. He was mentally and physically exhausted. But when he thought of her, Era was full of motivation. With the spicy strip in his mouth, he strolled down the long and serene street. He didn't know where the street led to, but he knew that there was hope in the distance. This city was very dangerous. After all, when they first arrived in the chaos space, Era and Bufang had been chased for a long time. So he knew very well that once his identity was exposed, he would absolutely be annihilated in an instant. Leaning against the corner of the wall, Era let out a tired breath. His hands trembled as he lifted the chilly strip and held it in his mouth. Suddenly, Era was stunned because he sensed a familiar aura. This aura caused ripples to form in his heart, causing it to tremble violently, tremble incessantly. It's her! Era was overjoyed. Even if she turned into ashes, Era would not mistake her aura. Although she was Heaven God Transmigration's daughter, he had slept with her. There was no way Ha would mistake her aura. Following the direction, Era ran all the way. He turned left and right, his heart filled with joy and motivation. Finally, Era saw her. The woman he had been thinking about all this time. Era panted slightly. With his strength, he should not have been panting, but at this moment, he was so excited that he could not help but gasp for breath. The scene in front of him slowly made the excitement on his face fade. Wrapped in a black robe, Era stared into the distance. There was a beautiful and heroic woman there. However, the woman was being held by a handsome man by the waist as they stepped into a magnificent mansion. What happened? Era was a little confused. The intimacy between the two of them struck him as if he had been struck by lightning. What the *CK is this? He sped away. He wanted to rush into the mansion, find her, and ask her about it. He did not want to question her because he was afraid that he would disturb her if he spoke too loudly. However, Ha was stopped by someone. He was stopped by the God King guards in front of the estate. I know her, Era said loudly and hurriedly. You know Madam? What a joke. Madam is the daughter of a heavenly god. She is now the wife of an ancient heavenly god. Who do you think you are? Do you have the right to know Madam? The two god kings sneered. Their auras fluctuated as they sent Hades' Era flying. Era was completely stunned. His ears were filled with a deafening sound. She had already become someone's wife? How was this possible? You lied to me. Hades' Era flipped over and stood up. His eyes revealed a tyrannical aura. His aura fluctuated. He was actually getting serious. The black robe was torn, and that handsome face appeared in the air. However, his strength was still too weak. He was being suppressed by the two guards. Era resisted bravely. He could not believe such a cruel reality. Suddenly, a gentle voice stopped everything. Hades' Era stood on the spot. His eyes were red. He coughed out blood from the corner of his mouth, and his aura fluctuated. He raised his head with difficulty and looked at the woman who seemed to be swaying in the sunlight. The woman's eyes were somewhat cold. She glanced at him, causing his face to instantly turn pale. The pain at that moment seemed to have surpassed the pain of a physical body. Era was dumped? Spare his life and chase him out of the city. The woman sighed and said indifferently. Her tone was very calm. The two guards nodded. Behind the woman, a handsome man walked over and put his arm around her waist. Is this the love seed you left behind when you were training in the mortal world? The man chuckled. I am very surprised that he could come to the primal chaos. Father had clearly killed him with a palm, the woman said indifferently. Spare his life. The woman's expression was complicated. She glanced at the miserable Hades' Era and turned to leave. That turn of her head felt like she had ruthlessly stabbed Era's chest with a knife. After the woman left, the man's face turned cold. Spare his life? Haha. Drag him out and kill him. Drag his divine soul into the purgatory of transmigration and never be reincarnated. This is the price you have to pay for touching my woman. The man said emotionlessly. Hades' Era's body trembled, as if he had been struck by lightning. The woman's determination and coldness woke him up as if he had been splashed with a basin of cold water. He had been dumped. She is indeed the daughter of heaven god transmigration. Era's eyes were a little dim. He could not help but sneer at the man's words. Hades' Era lowered his head, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. Then, he began to laugh as if he was shaking. The next moment, he raised his trembling hand, which was stained with blood, and held a spicy strip between his slender fingers. With the spicy strip dangling from the corner of his mouth, Era was still laughing. Why are you laughing when you are about to die? The man said coldly. Erha leaned against the wall, his body half hunched. What are you laughing at? Don't you know what's going on? Is the hat that I knitted for you easy to wear? Hades' Era sucked the spicy strip into his mouth. The aroma that seeped into his heart seemed to soothe the pain in his heart. Bufang is still the best, Hades' Era's voice rang out. The two guards' expressions became strange. A hat? It seems very powerful. The man's eyes burst out in an instant, burning like fire. You're courting death. I'll make you wish you were dead. In the temple of heaven god time, Lord Go, who was lying on the ground, suddenly jerked his head up. His eyes seemed to be looking around blankly. He glanced behind him. The stone door behind him was still closed. He had no idea what had happened behind it. I hope Bufang boy can finish cooking. I've been feeling more and more uneasy lately, Lord Go muttered. Lord Dog mumbled to himself. Then, he laid on the ground and yawned. His eyes seemed to be a little moist. He raised his paw, scratching his nose. Buzz, all of a sudden Lord Go, who was lying on the ground, narrowed his eyes. There seemed to be a solemn look in his eyes. What's this clown doing? Lord Go's nose twitched. Then, his eyes became sharp. He raised his paw, tore the void, and got inside. Behind the stone door Bufang was sitting cross-legged on the ground. He was brewing his emotions. At this level of cooking, emotions were the most important, which would affect the success rate of cooking. Ingredients floated around Bufang's body. The god of cooking set also floated. White tiger, gold dragon, vermilion bird, black tortoise, qilin, They appeared one by one, hovering between heaven and earth. A terrifying aura filled the entire room. Buzz, he took out an arm, which was the Soul Overlord's arm from Pride Great Soul Overlords. It was covered with shining scales that seemed to emit a cold light. A terrifying aura floated. It was the meat of a Great Soul Overlord, which was equivalent to a chaotic saint-level ingredient. It was an extremely precious ingredient. In addition to it, Bufang was also surrounded by the ingredients he had collected over the years. The other ingredients were supplementary, to better cook the Great Soul Overlord meat. The light between Bufang's brows grew brighter and brighter. In his god of cooking's eye, thousands of light spots emerged on the arm. The golden dragon wheeled, letting out a deafening roar as it flew over the arm. Immediately, it cut the arm into even pieces of meat. In fact, even now, Bufang had no idea what he was going to cook. After more than 1,000 simulated cooking sessions, the dish he cooked was different. Bufang did not think that he could have a specific dish in mind during the real cooking. He began to cook according to the description of the recipe. Knife skills, carving skills, stir-frying strength, flame temperature, everything was done according to the description of the recipe. For a moment, Bufang was immersed in a profound mystery. Bam! Nether King Ha coughed blood. His body was sent flying backward, smashing into the ground and leaving many cracks. A frightening pressure pressed down on his body, as if it wanted to shatter his bones. However, this kind of pain could not compare to the pain in his heart. Torture him for me. Pull out his divine soul and throw it into the transmigration purgatory. I want him to feel the most terrible pain. The man's face was somewhat ferocious. He did not know what had happened to her in the lower realm. However, the expression on this fellow's face made him very unhappy. The two guards were tired from fighting. The whole city seemed to be in an uproar. After all, such a big commotion would naturally attract the attention of many people in the Transmigration City. How could an ancient heaven god not attract attention when he was dealing with a god in such a big way? Era was in a trance. He was a little confused. Was it right to ask Bufang to bring him to the chaos space? Why had he knelt for so long in the ancient heaven god's relic? Boom! Era's body seemed to be about to crack. He took several steps back, and the pain spread throughout his body. He did not make a sound. He bit the spicy strip in his mouth, and did not let it fall to the ground. His head could be cut off, and he could bleed, but he could not lose the spicy strip. Finally, he came to his senses. It was not worth it for such a woman. He had missed too many spicy strips in the days when he did not want to eat or drink. After coming to his senses, Era erupted with an astonishing vitality. He was like a cockroach that could not be killed. He turned over and rose to his feet. With the spicy strip in his mouth, he dragged his broken body and dashed into the distance. I'll give you an emerald hat. No need to thank I. Before leaving, Hades' Era did not forget to tease him. Even Heaven God Transmigration's attack could not kill him. These God Kings could not do it either. The law of life circulated, and Hades' Era rushed out energetically. His loud voice lingered in the city. The man's face darkened with anger. You're courting death. He could not stand it anymore. As an ancient heaven god, he could not be humiliated like this. The power of the law of time surged and spread, instantly sealing the surrounding space. The man's aura soared into the sky. He reached out and grabbed at Hades' Era. He would not let this guy escape. He was going to torture this damned guy. Suddenly, the man's expression changed. Because the void was trembling. The palm that he stretched out was smacked away by a terrifying force. The next moment, the void rippled, and a dog's paw appeared in front of the damned guy, slapping at him. Boom! The man's expression changed drastically. He found that his law of time had collapsed under the paw. The whole city was in an uproar. The man's face was extremely cold. He stared at the black dog that had walked out of the void and narrowed his eyes. Heaven God Time. Chapter 1690. Heaven God Time. As soon as the name appeared, the whole city burst into an uproar. After all, the name was a taboo in the chaos space, let alone in this city under Heaven God Transmigration's command. Since Heaven God Time's return, the atmosphere in the chaos space had become a little strange. Now, everyone knew that Heaven God Time had returned to settle the score with Heaven God Transmigration for what he had done in the past. Hades' era's body was extremely weak. Of course, what was more serious was the wound in his heart. However, it healed quickly. He did not care. Although it had only been a short time, what he had experienced had undoubtedly baptized his soul. He held the spicy strip between his lips, which was trembling. After all, he did not lose anything in this matter. Had he been wronged? No. He had wronged someone else. That woman had long been this ancient heaven god's wife, and he had fallen madly in love with her. Hades' era raised his hand and covered half of his face. He pondered for a few seconds, paying tribute to his lost love. What are you still thinking about? Run. Lord Go glanced at Hades' era behind him. He rolled his eyes. If he had not sensed that this fellow was in trouble, he would not have wasted his beauty sleep to come to his rescue. He had pushed the ancient heaven god back with a palm. Lord Go glanced at Hades' era, then raised his paw and wrapped it around Hades' era. The law of time flowed, and he was going to escape with Hades' era. Lord Go's expression suddenly changed. The reason for that was because he discovered that the space within the city had been sealed. He could not leave with Hades' era. Rumble. In the depths of the city, in the temple of Heaven God Transmigration, a terrifying aura soared into the sky. The aura floated in the sky, bringing with it a rumbling sound. In an instant the void was sealed. Where are the 10 great protectors? This dog's foundation is unstable, and his injury has not healed. Everyone, capture him. A cold voice rang out from the temple of Heaven God Transmigration. In the next moment the void began to tremble. 9 figures soared into the sky and stepped into the air. Powerful law energy spread out and enveloped almost the entire sky. Lord Go narrowed his eyes. Carrying Nether King Erha, he flew out of the city in a flash. 10 ancient heavenly gods. The appearance of this lineup was extremely terrifying. Each ancient heaven god was equivalent to a saint of the Great Path. These ancient heaven gods were the supreme experts of the chaotic ancient clans who had submitted to Heaven God Transmigration. Every single one of them was the backbone of an ancient clan. Now that they attacked at the same time, it almost caused the entire primal chaos to tremble. The Lord Go did not confront him directly. Of course, this was the opponent's home ground. He wasn't stupid enough to fight here. After so many years, Heaven God Transmigration had been silent ever since he made his move. Heaven God Transmigration finally made his move again. This was obviously a signal. Boom! Hades' era was enveloped by the Lord Go's law of time and flew out of the city. The 10 ancient heaven gods sped out one after another. That included the ancient heaven god who Hades' era had put on the emerald hat. The air in the chaotic space seemed to be boiling. The ground was rumbling. The void seemed to be burning. The power of various laws became unusually active. Every Empyrean god was a controller of the laws of heaven. The void kept exploding. Hades' era coughed up blood. He was too weak, so he was at a disadvantage in this confrontation between heaven gods. His body was almost crushed by the energy. If Lord Go had not helped him block most of the heaven god's aura, he might have turned into a pile of minced meat in an instant. A grave look came into Lord Go's eyes. He didn't expect this to happen. The 10 ancient heaven gods were chasing after him. If he were at his peak, Lord Go would not be afraid at all. But now, his foundation was weak, and his strength had not fully recovered. He could stop 3 or 4 ancient heaven gods. But 10. He really couldn't stop them. The suppression of numbers made him feel extremely strained. Although he was a modern-day heaven god, he had just returned, so his strength was not much stronger than that of the top ancient heaven gods. Boom! Boom! The power of the laws was activated. The void kept exploding. The ancient heaven god's eyes were grave. "He's very weak now. Kill him!" roared an ancient heaven god. Thousands of laws were boiling over his body. He thrust out a finger. The finger pierced through the void in an instant. The power of the laws contained in it kept intertwining. Lord Go flipped over and slapped out with his paw. The exquisite dog paw swept across the void, shattering the power of the finger. A loud boom rang out. The ancient heaven god was thrown backward in a sorry state. Lord Go's body trembled. The delay allowed the 10 ancient heaven gods to catch up. In the temple of heaven god transmigration, under the ground, the whole blood pool was boiling and evaporating, and a rich blood energy filled the air. Heaven god transmigration took a deep breath. There was a black-colored energy continuously lingering within the bloody aura and surging continuously. The next moment, heaven god transmigration opened his eyes. At that moment, his scarlet pupils made those who looked at him feel as if they had fallen into hell. Heaven god transmigration raised his hand. The aura emanating from his palm caused a hole to burst open in the void. "I've finally connected you," heaven god transmigration laughed. He looked at his arm, which was covered with scales and even had mysterious patterns on it. It was the arm of the supreme expert who had smashed the arms of many heaven god palaces. Now, heaven god transmigration had transferred the arm to his body. He had cut off one of his arms and connected it to the soul demon's arm. For some reason, he felt a little excited. He felt a powerful force engulfing his mind in an instant, immersing him in the pleasure of power. He raised his hand. The thick and ferocious arm gently tapped the void. The heavy iron gate in the distance shattered in an instant. What an intoxicating power! The corners of heaven god transmigration's mouth curved into an intoxicated smile. The water in the blood pool had dried up, revealing the inside of the pool. In the middle of the pool were piles of scarlet heaven god bones. It was a creepy sight to behold. Gulp! When he reached the door, heaven god transmigration narrowed his eyes. He felt a hunger in his belly that made him tremble. Damn it! This feeling, as a heaven god, when had he ever felt hungry? How could such a strange emotion arise in his heart? Gulp! Gulp! However, he could not suppress the rumbling in his stomach. He clutched his belly and squatted on the ground, his face full of discomfort and horror. "I'm so hungry, too hungry." Heaven god transmigration struggled to stand up straight. The power of sin seemed to be floating in the depths of his eyes. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lip. Then, he took a step forward and continued walking. He walked out of the heaven god temple. In front of him was a vast city. The whole city seemed to be exuding an irrepressible aroma. "I'm so hungry, rumble." 10 ancient heaven gods stood in different directions and formed an array. The power of the law attracted each other and turned into a magical force that sealed Lord Go in midair. Lord Go's law of time enveloped Era. The next moment, his body changed. He turned into a white figure. Within the formation, there were incessant, fierce attacks bombarding down. Every time Lord Go attacked, he shattered the attacks. The heavy pressure and power caused his aura to fluctuate. The 10 ancient heaven gods put Lord Go under great pressure. "Lord Go, I'm sorry for dragging you into this." Hades' Era fell silent. Hovering in midair, shrouded in the law of time, he sensed the desperate situation around him, and his face became a little gloomy. He was always optimistic, cheerful, and funny, but now he even began to doubt himself. He wondered if he could not do anything right. He had put Lord Go in danger. "It doesn't matter. Even without you, Heaven God Transmigration is already ready to deal with me," Lord Dog's figure said indifferently. He didn't seem to care. Era's matter was just a prelude. Heaven God Transmigration had long wanted to deal with him. Rumble. The law of thunder, the law of light, the law of nightmare, all kinds of laws bombarded Lord Go. The chaos space seemed to tremble. However, no matter how many laws bombarded him, Lord Go slapped them away with his paw. For a moment they were in a stalemate. In the Temple of Heaven God Time, Yun Tianyi, who was in seclusion, received Lord Go's message, and her eyes narrowed. She hurriedly told the experts of the ancient clans outside the Temple of Heaven God Time. The experts' expressions changed, and they all moved. The two primordial heaven gods sat cross-legged in the air, then flew toward the battlefield. Yun Tianyi's heart was heavy. She knew that the battle was about to begin. However, she obeyed Lord Go's order and did not move. She sat cross-legged in front of the stone gate. His Excellency had said that she must make sure that the master behind the stone gate could cook smoothly. Clip-clop, Heaven God Transmigration was so hungry that his whole body was about to convulse. It had been a long time since he had felt this way. He walked on the ancient path of the city in a daze. The magnificent temple of Heaven God Transmigration made him look a little lonely. The transplanted arm had disappeared and turned into a normal human arm. But once it appeared, it would turn into a devil's arm. This hunger might be a side effect of the transplanted arm. Heaven God Transmigration shook his head. There was a look of struggle in his eyes. In his eyes, the fragrance emitted by the entire city made him salivate uncontrollably. How could I have such a thought? Heaven God Transmigration was shocked. In the distance, when several god kings saw Heaven God Transmigration, they immediately flew over and knelt in front of him. Your Excellency, the remnants of the Temple of Heaven God Time have all moved out. Should we join the battle? The God King looked at Heaven God Transmigration with a fanatical look. Heaven God Transmigration, the master of the chaos space, was the god in everyone's heart. Heaven God Transmigration would definitely bring them to the peak of the world. Suddenly, just as the God King was waiting for Heaven God Transmigration's order, drip, viscous liquid dripped down from his head. The God King froze and looked up in confusion. His pupils constricted. No. 10 ancient heaven gods hovered in the sky. The array had turned into a huge disk and was constantly suppressing Hades. Lord Go threw out his paw to resist the array, but his body was being suppressed and kept falling to the ground. Boom! The ground exploded as if it would be torn apart in an instant. The law of time that wrapped around Hades' era became unstable. It trembled and cracked. Hades' era's body shook and he kept coughing up blood. It seemed that Lord Go could not hold on any longer. The array was like a huge net, trapping Lord Go in the center. Suppress! An ancient heaven god bellowed. The law of time shot into the sky from his eyes. Lord Go was smashed to the ground. The law of time was restrained and constantly compressed. If I, Lord Go, were at my peak, I would have killed all of you with my paw. Lord Go was somewhat unwilling to give up. Buzz, it's a pity that you are not at your peak. Heaven God Transmigration's son-in-law, the ancient heaven god who had been helped by Era to put on the emerald hat, slowly walked out. He held a black sword in his hand. The sword was flowing with the power of the law of transmigration. The 9 ancient heaven gods were supporting the array and suppressing Lord Go. Holding the sword, the ancient heaven god walked step by step toward Lord Go. This is the god-slaying sword given to you by Heaven God Transmigration. It will cut off your head, shatter your causality throne, and make your divine soul fall into the purgatory of transmigration, the ancient heaven god said excitedly. It was an honor to kill a modern-day heaven god with his own hands. Buzz, he raised the black sword, which seemed to absorb all the light, and was as black as ink. It fell suddenly. Without saying anything, he was going to kill Lord Go with one strike. Suddenly, a figure stood in front of Lord Go. Hades' era's eyes became very determined. Die. Towards Ha, This ancient heavenly deity hated him to the core. As the sword fell, Era raised his arms. Slash. Erha was directly cut into two halves. Lord Go froze. The ancient heaven gods around them all sneered at the sight of this. They were already numb to life and death. Lord Go gritted his teeth, looking angry and sorrowful. The ancient heaven god laughed crazily and raised his sword again. This time, it was pointed at Lord Go. Slash. Suddenly, another figure appeared in front of the sword. Hades' Era, who had been cut in half, had reformed and was standing in front of Lord Go, holding the black god-slaying sword with both hands. Come on. Cut me. Era's eyes were filled with madness. Lord Go was stunned, and so were the ancient heaven gods around him. Why couldn't he be killed? Slash. The heaven god with the emerald hat roared and slashed again. Hades' Era was cut in half again. However, this time, under everyone's gaze, the law of life wriggled. Hades' Era, who had been cut in half, was restored once again. He tore off his clothes, puffed out his chest, and shouted crazily. Come on. Keep going. Cut me. Hurry up. Keep going. Stab me in the chest with your little sword. This scene. The ancient heaven god's hand, which was holding the sword, trembled. Stab your sister. What kind of monster is this guy? Lord Go was also slightly taken aback. Then, his eyes flickered and he was pleasantly surprised. This shameless character, this unkillable vitality, could it be that Hades' Era is heaven god life, who has fallen into the cycle of reincarnation? Chapter 1691. The unkillable Hades' Era? Looking at Nether King Erha, who had been cut into two halves and had instantly recovered, the surrounding experts couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Lord Go's mouth twitched. Looking at Hades' Era's back, a bold idea came to his mind. Could Hades' Era be the reincarnation of heaven god life? That's very possible. What a shameless man, boom! The ancient heaven god holding the god-slaughtering sword shuddered. The look in Hades' Era's eyes sent a chill down his spine. It was a chill that rose from the depths of his heart. Who are you? The ancient heaven god couldn't help but ask. He didn't believe that Hades' Era was just a god from the lower realms. It was impossible for a god to recover so quickly under the god-slaughtering sword, which was given to him by heaven god transmigration. Even an ancient heaven god would be severely injured by one slash of the sword. I am your grandfather. Although Hades' Era was recovering, the pain of being torn apart was a terrible torture to his soul and mind. He was in so much pain that he almost convulsed. Fresh blood continued to drip down, forming a puddle. Then, without anyone noticing, the blood seeped into the ground. It was as if it had been absorbed by something. The ancient heaven god finally came to his senses. How dare you! After being scolded by Hades' Era, he decided to throw caution to the wind. Sword after sword slashed down. Every time it slashed down, it would cut Nether King Erha into two halves. The scene sent a chill down the spines of the ancient heaven gods who were maintaining the array. Lord Go was furious, and he kept trying to break the array. Slash, the sword stabbed down. The ancient heaven god was a little frightened by the slashes. Finally, Hades' Era was no longer recovering, as if he had finally been killed. Finally dead. The ancient heavenly god's heart was filled with sorrow. He glanced at the wreckage on the ground and couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Beads of perspiration dripped down from his forehead. He had actually been frightened by a god. However, all of this was finally over. Because this fellow had been hacked to death by him. Why don't you continue to revive? The ancient heavenly god was also angered as he roared. In the next instant, he pulled out his sword, raised his head, and looked at Lord Dog in the distance. Now, it's your turn. The ancient heavenly god took a deep breath. Then, with the sword in his hand, he charged at Lord Go. He waved his sword and slashed at the Lord Go at lightning speed. This sword burst forth with a blood-red light, as if the primordial chaos was about to be sliced apart. This sword strike was going to slay the heavenly time god. Yun Tianyi sat uneasily in front of the stone gate. Her heart was trembling. The others had gone to fight, and now only she and Bu Fang were left in the vast temple of Heaven God. However, she was really anxious. She did not know how the battle was going. His Excellency and the others seemed to have met with misfortune. Yun Tianyi wanted to help. However, she did not dare to disobey Heavenly Time God's order. She had to protect His Excellency behind the stone gate. That way, His Excellency could finish cooking with peace of mind. Yun Tianyi did not know whether cooking was still so important at this critical juncture. Suddenly, the stone gate began to tremble. Rumble, a rumbling sound rang out. Yun Tianyi froze. She jerked to her feet and turned to look at the stone gate. Could it be that His Excellency had finished cooking? Was he finally done? The trembling lasted for a long time. After a while, the stone gate fell silent. Yun Tianyi did not even dare to breathe loudly. She stared at the gate and soon she felt a little lost. There was no more movement from the gate. Yun Tianyi moved closer to the gate as if she wanted to see what was happening inside through the crack. However, the crack was so tight that she could not see what was going on inside. Creak! Suddenly, the gate began to shake. The gate slowly opened. Yun Tianyi was shocked and took a few steps back. She was a little embarrassed, like a child who had been caught doing something bad. His Excellency, Yun Tianyi said timidly. Bu Fang glanced at Yun Tianyi indifferently. He looked a little tired and his aura was a little weak. However, he was full of spirit. The aura that emanated from him stunned Yun Tianyi. Where are the others? Bu Fang glanced at Yun Tianyi and asked lightly. Yun Tianyi paused and quickly told Bu Fang what had happened. Lord Go and many heaven gods were fighting against Heaven God Transmigration's forces. The chaos space was in chaos. Yun Tianyi looked at Bu Fang curiously because she did not see any dish in Bu Fang's hand. She leaned to the side and looked inside. She found that apart from the surging heat and the rich power of law, there were no dishes inside. Come on. Let's go and have a look. Bu Fang's expression remained unchanged. He knew that Heaven God Transmigration would attack, but he did not expect it to be so soon. Yun Tianyi hurried to follow Bu Fang obediently. She found that Bu Fang had an aura that made her submit. The aura was getting stronger and stronger. The two of them walked out of the temple of Heaven God Time. As soon as they stepped out of the temple, suddenly, a thunderclap rang out. All kinds of terrible power of law seemed to have turned into a huge net, flying toward Bu Fang and Yun Tianyi. Yun Tianyi's expression changed dramatically. Bu Fang, on the other hand, looked as calm as ever. Rumble! The terrifying attacks were unceasingly rising and falling. Then, experts at the God King and God Emperor level emerged. Two ancient heaven gods sat cross-legged in midair, looking coldly at Bu Fang and Yun Tianyi as they walked out of the temple. You're finally here, the two ancient heaven gods said indifferently. These two ancient heaven gods were not Heaven God Transmigration's guardians, but they were also extremely strong. After all, those who could become ancient heaven gods had the power of a saint of the great path. The array of 100 deities. Rise. The two ancient heaven gods narrowed their eyes. They knew that Bu Fang was the sixth modern-day heaven god. However, since Heaven God Transmigration had sent them here, he naturally had a way to deal with them. Buzz, the God Kings and God Emperors rose into the air and formed a great array. The dense power of the laws immediately lingered around him, entangling him. The next moment, they turned into an array that enveloped Yun Tianyi and Bu Fang. Heaven God Transmigration controls the chaos space. If you try to resist him, you will be destroyed in the end. An old ancient heaven god smiled faintly. Then, he raised his hand and waved it in the air. The law seemed to send out a message. He wanted to kill Bu Fang. Roar. The array of 100 deities. The power unleashed by the array formed by top God Kings and God Emperors, and with the help of 2 ancient heaven gods as the eye of the array, was extremely terrible. The whole ground seemed to cave in. Fortunately, the Temple of Heaven God Time was there to resist the power. Yun Tianyi planned to drag Bufang back into the temple. Unfortunately, the way out was blocked. Now, she could only face the array. She gritted her teeth and decided to use the power of her bloodline again. Although she might not be able to resist the battle even if she used her bloodline, it was better than nothing. However, before she could release the power of her bloodline, a hand rested on his shoulder. The corners of Bufang's mouth curved upward. The next moment, his mind flickered. On his shoulder, Little Hu's eyes lit up. Then, he shot up into the sky. "These people can't stop me," Bufang said. As soon as he finished speaking, Little Hu's eyes narrowed, and his snow-white fur turned scarlet in an instant. It was as if his blood was about to burn. Little Hu opened his mouth. Behind his mouth, a ray of light actually appeared. Then a huge perishing pot floated out of it. It was an enhanced version of the perishing pot. The ingredients used were all top ingredients, which greatly improved its power. For Bufang, the perishing pot used to be his trump card. In the past, because Little Hu was too weak, he didn't dare to let him eat the perishing pot. But now he could eat it now. Boom! Little Hu's mouth fell open. In front of his mouth, a spinning perishing pot flowed with blood. Soon, it turned into a blood-colored stream of light and shot out. It collided with the arrays. Is this going to work? Yun Tianyi looked at the cute Little Hu in the sky, a little confused. Even though he had turned blood-colored, he was still so cute. Rumble! A rumbling sound rang out. A huge explosion broke out. Bufang stood where he was with his hands clasped behind his back. The power of the law flowed and turned into an energy shield, blocking his body. Yun Tianyi was dumbfounded. This power, rumble! The perishing pot exploded and turned into a huge blood-colored lotus, which was boiling with a scorching heat that could evaporate a human being. Little Hu fell from the sky and landed in Bufang's arms. She seemed a little weak after releasing this move, and she rubbed her head in Bufang's arms. Bufang rubbed Little Hu's head. Then, he turned to Yun Tianyi and said, "Let's go." Bufang's words gave Yun Tianyi pause. The two of them moved forward. Bam! 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 One figure after another fell from the sky. Those were all deity emperors and deity kings who were heavily injured. Some weaker or unlucky ones even evaporated. The 2 ancient heaven gods sat cross-legged in midair, their eyes wide and filled with disbelief. A fox was actually able to break their grand array? What the F***ck was going on? The 2 ancient heaven gods trembled and wanted to turn and flee. However, Bufang raised his Taotai arm slightly. Divine power surged. Rumble, 5 supreme laws gathered into a palm and thrust out. Bam! 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 The 2 ancient heaven gods tried to flee, but they were crushed to pieces by the palm. Their bodies were smashed to pieces, and they fell from the sky to the ground. Bufang ignored them and walked slowly with his hands clasped behind his back. Behind him, Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. Then, he stretched out his huge palms, one in each hand. Rip! The clothes of the 2 ancient heaven gods were torn to pieces, and Xiao Bai threw them into the distance. It was as if he was throwing away trash. Xiao Bai patted his chest and followed behind Bufang. Yun Tianyi was dumbfounded. The 6th heaven god was indeed domineering. A dog barked. It resounded through the heavens. The approaching god-slaying sword could not pierce through the barrier. The ancient heaven god holding the sword was shocked as well. He was indeed heaven god time. However, with the god-slaying sword given to him by heaven god transmigration, he still had a chance. Rumble! After being knocked away by the barking, he regained his footing and charged at Bufang again. The sword energy was like a dragon, flying between heaven and earth. The 9 ancient heaven gods pushed the array to its limit. Lord Go was almost lying on the ground. Die! the god-slaying sword fell from the sky. Murderous aura surged. Lord Go's eyes were fixed on the falling sword. Suddenly, the sword could not move any further. The ground trembled. Then, cracks continued to appear on the wall. A mighty aura of life suddenly surged. Then, the ground parted. A dilapidated palace built with broken walls slowly rose up from the ground. The array formation enveloped everyone within it. Lord Go paused. The 10 ancient heaven gods were stunned as well. What happened? Lord Go's eyes burst into brilliant light. This is the Temple of Heaven God Life. Lord Go's aura fluctuated. He was very excited. Heaven God Life had returned. Buzz, a mighty aura of life swirled around. Then a lazy yawn rang out. The pupils of the ancient heaven god holding the god-slaying sword constricted. Because in front of him, flesh and blood began to pile up. Slowly, Hades' Era's body, which had turned into a pile of minced meat, had recovered. Furthermore, the aura on his body began to surge explosively. Chapter 1692. Hades' Era? Why wasn't he dead yet? The surrounding ancient heavenly gods were all stupefied. Was this guy a cockroach? He could still come back to life after being killed over and over again. Even a god should have used up all his energy after being killed so many times. However, not only was Hades' Era still alive, but he was also becoming more and more powerful. The ancient heavenly god who was holding the god-slaying sword and had been given an emerald hat by Hades' Era narrowed his eyes. His heart trembled as he watched Hades' Era's aura skyrocket. He sensed Hades' Era's aura break through from the god realm to the god king realm, low, middle, high. Then, he broke through to the god emperor realm without any obstacles. Heavenly gods were above the god emperor realm. Heavenly gods were divided into ancient heavenly gods and current heavenly gods. Everyone present was an ancient heavenly god. However, the guy who had been slashed countless times, it was so easy to break through the shackles of the divine emperor realm, as if he was holding a sharp sword and piercing through a thin membrane. That kind of ease was shocking. Oh. Hades' Era spread his arms and closed his eyes. His mouth let out a rhythmic moan. That appearance of his that was asking for a beating was really unbearable. Boom. The dilapidated heavenly god palace became more and more obvious. Finally, Hades' Era's aura broke through to the heavenly god realm. A thick power of law poured down from the sky and instantly penetrated his body. This thick power of law was the legendary law of life. As the power of law poured down, the entire heavenly god palace of life seemed to wake up from its deathly stillness. Everyone felt as if everything before their eyes had become clear. The dilapidated walls seemed to emit a dazzling light. This is the ancient heavenly god holding the god-slaying sword felt as if his heart had been pounded. His mouth gaped open in disbelief as he looked at Hades' Era, whose aura kept rising. The heavenly god of life. This B**** was the legendary heavenly life god. The heavenly life god. Wasn't she supposed to be a benevolent heavenly god who was filled with holiness and kindness? What's with that smirk? His worldview collapsed. Lord Go was also speechless. The heavenly life goddess, thinking back, the heavenly life god, who had wreaked havoc in the primordial chaos and made countless beautiful women in the ancient races of primordial chaos tremble in fear, had returned. It was rumored that the heavenly life god's ultimate technique could impregnate anyone she looked at. Could it be that the primal chaos was about to reappear again? Hades' Era's aura was still rising, but now, the speed at which it was climbing had slowed down. The main reason was that, after reaching the heavenly god realm, it was basically very difficult to continue advancing rapidly. Hades' Era was the heavenly life god. Just like the Lord Go, he had been reincarnated, so he was naturally unable to fully recover his powers. Lord Go did not know whether to laugh or cry. So, the heavenly life god had been by his side since he had fallen into the cycle of reincarnation. He had always been an acquaintance of his. No wonder this C***T looked so repulsive. Hades' era had become more and more handsome. His hair had turned golden, and his robe had transformed into a holy white robe. His skin was translucent and supple, as if it were covered in a layer of crystal. He was even more attractive than a woman. His body seemed to be emitting white light, and a disk also appeared behind him. This was the disk manifested by the complete condensation of the laws of life. This represented his heavenly life god's Tao position. Lord Go could also manifest this disk, but at their level they could conceal it freely. Take Bufang for example. In fact, Bufang also had a Tao disk. Boom! The heavenly life temple trembled incessantly. The formation of the 10 heavenly gods seemed to be a little unstable. Damn it! It's the heavenly life temple's formation. The formation has also awakened. The expressions of the 10 ancient heavenly gods all flickered. They had never imagined that the shameless man would be the heavenly life god. This was truly unexpected. Perhaps, even Heaven God Transmigration himself did not expect this. Because of the heavenly life temple's formation, the 2 different formations repelled each other. As a result, the 10 heavenly gods could no longer stabilize the formation. The formation instantly crumbled apart. The moment the formation collapsed, Hades' era opened his eyes. His gaze was unfocused, as if he had experienced the most intoxicating thing in the world. So I am so awesome? Hades' era murmured. He had never imagined that he would be the heavenly life god. Now he had a cannon for a shotgun. This king is worthy of being called Heaven's chosen one. Hades' era was so excited that he seemed to be trembling all over. A thought appeared in his mind, Buzz. The heavenly life temple seemed to tremble rhythmically in response to his mental power. Slowly, a flower materialized in Hades' era's hand. It was a strange, wine-red flower with petals wrapped around one another. The stem of the flower extended downwards and was covered with ferocious thorns. This was the heavenly life god's divine weapon, the thorned rose. A weapon filled with the aura of life, the thorned rose, the legendary item that had once stirred up a storm in the chaos space. Lord Dog struggled free from the suppression and restraints of the array. Using his cat-like steps, he soared into the sky and floated in the vault of heaven. He glanced at the coquettish Hades' era and rolled his eyes. Hades' era was wearing a long white robe, which was open at the chest area, revealing his fair chest. A tuft of golden bangs hung down from his forehead, accompanied by that handsome face. No wonder this guy could sleep with Heaven God Transmigration's daughter. If Heaven God Transmigration knew that Hades' era was the heavenly life god, he would probably vomit a ton of blood in anger. Back in the chaos space, when the Heaven God life traveled, all the ancient clans had to hide their daughters tightly. Heaven God Transmigration had hidden his daughter for so long, but in the end she still slept with him. This might also be a kind of reincarnation. Dog. I didn't expect I to be so bad *SS. Hades' era pushed back his bangs and chuckled. The heavenly life temple trembled. Lord Go rolled his eyes. You're too full of yourself. How dare you call me dog? Is that something you can call me dog? Even Bufang has to call me Lord Go. Boom. The 10 heavenly life gods landed on the ground at the same time. They dispersed the formation. It was not a wise move to set up a formation in the heavenly life temple. Let's not talk about this. Let I see. TSK, all the traitors of the ancient clans are here. A spicy strip appeared in Hades' era's hand, and he put it in his mouth, which made him look more playful. After restoring his cultivation base and activating the heavenly life temple, Hades' era's memory had also returned. Although he was laughing and cursing, his eyes were emotionless as he looked at these ancient heaven gods. They were filled with coldness and killing intent. Retreat. 2 modern-day heaven gods. We can't defeat them. Retreat. The ancient heaven gods looked at each other, then turned and left without hesitation. Boom! A terrifying aura of the law gushed out, and they seemed to have turned into streams of light that shot in all directions. The heavenly god temple's restriction on them was too great. Hades' era played with the thorny rose in his hand with a misty look in his eyes. With the spicy strip in his mouth, he curled up slightly. Did I say you could leave? And you? Yes, you're the one with the sword. Did you feel good after slashing I so many times? Now it's time for I to feel good. Hades' era smiled faintly. Then, he twisted his finger, and the thorny rose spun and shot out. Buzz, the petals shattered and fell to the ground. The entire heavenly god temple was bathed in white light, and countless burgundy petals fell. The scene was somewhat beautiful. Lord Go was speechless. Flashy but impractical. Why didn't he recognize her earlier? Her flamboyant personality was too similar to Era's. Go. All of you, stay here. Don't leave any helpers for that old thief Samsara. The chaos space is in need of a great purge, Lord Go said. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure turned into a stream of light and shot out. He slapped out with his exquisite dog paw. One of the ancient heaven gods focused his eyes and fought back, his palm colliding with Lord Go's. Slash. The ancient heaven god was sent flying backward, coughing up blood. His face turned pale. Without the suppression of the array, Lord Go could display his strength to the fullest. There was still a gap between a chaotic saint and a saint of the Great Path. In fact, Lord Go was a little aggrieved at being suppressed by the array, but now he felt very good. Just as Hades' era said, it was time for them to feel good. Bam! Lord Go killed one with each paw. None of the ancient heaven gods could withstand it. They were sent flying backward like cannonballs, smashed into the ground, and bounced off. As soon as they got up from the ground, they ran outside. Hades' era's robe fluttered. Like a playboy, he landed in front of the ancient heaven god holding the sword. The heaven god shuddered. Without a doubt, the sword stabbed out. Swoosh, burgundy petals swept over. Now that I see this sword, I'm angry, Hades' era said. The burgundy petals wrapped around the god-slaying sword, turned and snatched it away. Slash. 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 The petals suddenly became sharp and cut off the ancient heaven god's arm. Don't kill me. I was forced. Heaven god transmigration forced us to submit to him. What happened back then was not our fault. For Chi-Chi's sake, please spare me. Your Excellency. The ancient heaven god begged for mercy, his face full of fear. He saw killing intent in Hades' era's eyes. This killing intent caused his mind to tremble. Chi-Chi. Oh, she's old scoundrel transmigration's daughter. There are many women who have slept with I, but who is she? The corners of Hades' era's mouth twitched faintly. After regaining his memory, Hades' era finally understood how awesome heaven god life was. Hades' era was a little embarrassed when he read the memory. He raised one hand and covered his face. Hades' era's cheeks flushed slightly. He held a spicy strip in his mouth. While covering his face, he stretched out his other arm and swung his slender wrist down slightly. Buzz, countless burgundy flower petals fell in an instant. Puff! The ancient heaven god only had time to let out a miserable howl. He was killed in an instant. Buzz, the twisted soul of the ancient heaven god, appeared, staring at Hades' era with a twisted face. You will die. All of you will die, he hissed. He turned into a beam of light and sped into the distance. Hades' era did not stop him. The soul flew out of the temple of heaven god life. In this place, which symbolized life, he was full of desire for life. The other ancient heaven gods were also subdued by Lord Go. Each strand of dog hair turned into a chain condensed by the law of time. The chains of time bound the ancient heaven gods one after another. These were the strongest experts of the ancient chaotic clans, but now they had all become their prisoners. In that war, countless ancient heaven gods of the ancient chaotic clans had been killed or wounded. In the ruins of countless ancient heaven gods, the bones of heaven gods were piled up in groups. It was a baptism of blood. When he thought back to the events of that time, it was still unbearable to look at. Therefore, Lord Go did not kill them completely. He still spared the lives of these ancient heaven gods. After all, it was not easy for an ancient heaven god to be born in the current chaotic universe. Hades' era landed. The flower petals returned, turning back into a rose with thorns. Fiddling with the rose, Hades' era walked up to Lord Go. "Heh, dog, well done," Hades' era said with a smile. The journey had not been easy, and the pain of being killed was still deeply etched in his mind. However, life had to go on, and life had to continue. Facing it with a smile was the right choice. "Shut up. I dare you to say that again. Don't think that I, Lord Go, can't do anything to you now that you've recovered your strength." Lord Go glanced at Hades' era and twitched his mouth. Hades' era laughed like an idiot. Her fair, sparkling skin flushed as she laughed. It was quite attractive. Suddenly, the entire temple of heaven god life shook. A terrifying aura, carrying with it a dreadful brutality, suddenly approached them. The expressions of Hades' era and Lord Go changed drastically. Outside the temple of heaven god life, a figure hovered in the sky, shrouded in blood, death, and sinful energy. Heaven god Transmigration stuck out his tongue and licked his lip. Looking down at the broken temple of heaven god life, he twitched the corner of his mouth. The next moment, the arm shrouded in black energy snapped its fingers. A black ball emerged. With a flick of its fingers, it fell straight toward the temple of heaven god life. Chapter 1693. Swoosh, it was a perfectly round black ball. It was about the size of a fist. It was as black as ink. From the void, he fell vertically like a small black balloon, slowly floating and floating. It didn't fall very fast, but it wasn't slow either. However, as the black ball floated down, there seemed to be an extremely powerful and oppressive aura shrouding them. In the temple of heaven god life, Hades' era and Lord Go both raised their heads and stared at the falling black ball. "What a powerful aura," Lord Go said gravely. Hades' era played with the thorny rose in her hand, her pretty brows furrowed. "This aura is familiar. It's that old villain reincarnation." Swoosh. The black ball fell. In an instant, an extremely terrifying aura erupted. In the blink of an eye, the aura surged as if it was going to destroy heaven and earth. Although the temple of heaven god life was in ruins, at this moment, an extremely bright light burst out of it. The light soared into the sky, and in an instant, it enveloped everything within it. It was a circular array with white dots of light flashing on it. The dots of light flowed slowly like stars in the endless starry sky. The black ball smashed into the formation. A moment later, an endless aura erupted. Boom! A terrible aura soared into the sky, as if it had turned into a black dragon that was roaring and destroying everything. The array spun unceasingly as if it would collapse at any moment. Under this pressure, the entire temple of heaven god life trembled, and even the broken walls shook. Rubble rolled down. Hades' era narrowed his eyes, holding a spicy strip between his lips. "This old villain, I's temple of heaven god life has just appeared, and now it's going to be destroyed? This aura is a little strange. It's that palm from years ago." Lord Go's expression was also very serious. That palm had smashed the entire temple of heaven god life. The 5 heavenly gods had only managed to block that palm with their combined strength. Furthermore, they had used unparalleled techniques to sever that arm. Unfortunately, that arm had fallen into heaven god Transmigration's hand. As for the other heaven gods, they were also sent into the cycle of transmigration by heaven god Transmigration. They knew that heaven god Transmigration must have been studying that arm during their absence. The owner of that arm was unmatched. Just a single arm was enough for the 5 of them to block it together, to the extent where they almost couldn't stop it. Naturally, it was very mysterious. The power of the owner of the arm was above that of a heavenly god. To everyone, this was a temptation. Rumble. The explosion resounded throughout the world. The temple of heavenly god life finally stopped trembling. The dazzling formation slowly dissipated. The palace of heavenly god life was not completely destroyed. Hades' era exhaled, raised his hand, and patted his open chest. I was scared to death. I almost thought that I would be homeless the moment I returned. In the sky. Heaven God Transmigration narrowed his eyes. Oh, interesting. You can't even break the formation like this? His aura was a little strange, as if it was constantly fluctuating. Step by step, he descended from the sky, as if he was walking on a flight of stairs. Eventually, he landed on the top of the temple of heavenly god life. His eyes narrowed as if he could see Hades' era and Lord go through the temple of heavenly god life. In the temple of heavenly god, the ancient heaven gods, who had been chained by Lord Go with the time chain, began to struggle excitedly. Lord Dog furrowed his brows and pressed down with his paw. The time chain immediately burst into light. The minds of these ancient heaven gods sank into the endless river of time, unable to extricate themselves. Damn it! Your divine ability is much more awesome than I's divine ability to impregnate anyone I stared at, Hades' era said in surprise. Is that a divine ability? You're just a slut, Lord Go said, glancing sideways at Hades' era. Heaven God Transmigration landed on the roof. He could not enter the temple of heavenly God. However, Heaven God Transmigration raised his hand and smashed it down with his thick arm. A loud boom rang out. He smashed the top of the already broken temple of heavenly God life. The entire temple shook as if it was about to explode. The power of the punch made Lord Go and Hades' era shudder. Old thief, be gentle. Ouch. Erha looked at Heaven God Transmigration and could not help but feel sorry for him. Heaven God Transmigration glanced at Hades' era. The next moment, he raised his arm again. This time, black smoke swirled around his fist. The fist smashed down. Hades' era's heart trembled. Boom. The array emerged once again. Dog, let's go together. We can't let him destroy the temple of heavenly God. Hades' era said, gritting his teeth. The next moment, his white robe fluttered, and his golden hair fluttered. Then, he turned into a beam of light and rushed into the sky. Lord Go exhaled. His fur stood on end, and his aura began to fluctuate. However, he did not move. A rumbling sound rang out. Nether King Erha's figure flew backward, smashing on the ground. Lord Go was speechless. Hades' era got up from the ground with a straight face and brushed the dust off his face. Ugh! Doggy, does this posture look handsome? Lord Go rolled his eyes. Hades' era had recovered his cultivation base, and his strength was almost equal to that of a modern-day heaven god. However, he had been slapped back by Heaven God Transmigration. How strong was Heaven God Transmigration now? This time, it should be his real body, not a clone. Go! Lord Go said. Boom! The law of time burst out, and one chain after another wrapped around his body. Then, the dog's paw slammed out. He thrust out his paw, turned into a beam of black light, and rushed out of the temple of Heaven God life. Hades' era narrowed his eyes. He waved the thorny rose. Thousands of petals swirled around him, and the white petals swirled around him. He could lose the team battle, but he could not lose his dignity. Stepping on the wine-red petals, he soared into the sky. The law of life rose from his body and shot toward Heaven God Transmigration like a giant pillar. Lord Go and Hades' era rushed out of the temple of Heaven God life. Boom! Boom! Heaven God Transmigration was engaged in a fierce battle. You're finally out. Heaven God Transmigration's mouth was stained with blood. He narrowed his eyes and looked somewhat evil. He raised his hand. Then, he pressed it down. Boom! A gray transmigration vortex emerged over his head and pressed down on Hades' Era and Lord Go. Lord Go's paw disappeared in an instant. Hades' Era's thick law of life was also shattered. The two landed in the sky, facing Heaven God Transmigration from afar. Lord Go's fur stood on end, and the next moment, he turned into a white figure. As for Era, he was as graceful as ever. Heaven God Life, it's you. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes fell on Hades' Era. He looked at Era in surprise. That's right, he was shocked. No wonder this little deity didn't die after taking a palm strike from him in the lower realms. It turned out to be Heaven God Life. In fact, he had exiled 4 heaven gods and made them fall into the cycle of reincarnation. Even he did not know who they were reincarnated into. However, with Heaven God Time's return, the other heaven gods should be returning soon. All this is that guy's doing. Heaven God Transmigration thought of Bufang, and his heart grew darker and darker. Now that he had the mysterious arm, he hated that chef even more. He felt that the chef was extremely disgusting. He wanted to slap him to death. Of course, now he had to deal with the 2 heaven gods in front of him. Hey, old villain Transmigration, are you surprised? Hades' Era said with a smile. He held the thorny rose in his hand and narrowed his eyes. His expression made him want to beat him up. Heaven God Life's life force is indeed tenacious. He is almost immortal. Heaven God Transmigration exhaled. He clenched his fists, but his hatred for Hades' Era did not diminish. Instead, it increased. After learning Hades' Era's identity, he became even angrier. He had hidden his daughter to avoid this stinky guy, but in the end, after returning from the cycle of reincarnation, he still slept with his daughter. Era, do it now. Lord Go felt that Heaven God Transmigration's aura was a little unstable because of his anger. The black smoke swirling around him seemed to be in conflict with the law of transmigration. This made it difficult for Heaven God Transmigration to control this power. Kill him while he's down, Lord Go naturally knew this. Rumble! Lord Go's exquisite paw slapped out, and the chaos space instantly exploded with a deafening rumble. Then, Hades' Era struck out. The wine-red petals kept spinning and finally turned into a pair of petal wings on his back. He flapped his wings. They flew toward Heaven God Transmigration in an instant. Heaven God Transmigration rubbed his forehead and steadied his spinning body. Then, a scarlet ferocity burst out of the depths of his eyes. The law of transmigration spread to his palm, and he raised it to block Lord Go's exquisite paw. Then, he threw out a punch with the transplanted arm. It smashed hard toward Hades' Era. Hades' Era's wings shattered in an instant. Then, they turned into scattered petals. The punch pierced through the air and slammed hard into Hades' Era's face. Hades' Era's head twisted, and he was knocked flying backward. Damn it! Old thief! Don't hit me in the face! Hades' Era flew backward and smashed to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. A huge pit appeared in the ground. Lord Go barked and continued to swing his paw. On the ground, Hades' Era flipped over and rose to his feet. With the law of life swirling around him, he recovered. He soared into the sky again. Slash! Another punch. Half of Hades' Era's face twisted and fell to the ground again. F***CKU. Hades' Era growled. Rumble. However, before long, Hades' Era fell to the ground again. Why am I always the one who gets hurt? Hades' Era was furious. Lord Go was also smashed to the ground, creating a deep pit. Hades' Era and Lord Go looked up and exhaled. This guy is too strong. Lord Go said. You really disappoint me. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were clear on one side and scarlet on the other. He shook his head with an undisguised look of disappointment on his face. He was very lonely now, the loneliness of invincibility. He had thought that the 2 modern-day heaven gods who had returned could let him feel the real power of the transplanted arm. Unfortunately, these two fellows were too weak. You've given the causality thrones to that chef. What right do you have to fight me? Heaven God Transmigration sneered. He raised his hand. The terrible power of sin immediately lingered and spread over his pitch-black arm. Buzz, countless rifts emerged in the void. Lord Go sucked in a cold breath. That's the aura of a soul demon. This lunatic is really in cahoots with the soul demon. Hades Era's face grew grave, and his cheeky smile disappeared. He sensed a terrible aura of death from Heaven God Transmigration. He was Heaven God Life, and yet he could sense the aura of death. This showed how terrifying Heaven God Transmigration was now. He should be getting serious. Sure enough, Heaven God Transmigration's transplanted arm changed. It suddenly swelled up and became even bigger than his body. Insect scales covered the entire arm. Then, he clenched his fist. Heaven God Transmigration let out a deafening roar. He clenched his fist. Rumble! The power of sin soared into the sky, causing heaven and earth to tremble. The punch flew toward Lord Go and Hades Era at lightning speed. Damn it! Lord Go's pupils constricted. Hades Era shuddered as well. From the punch, they sensed the aura that had smashed the Heaven God temple many years ago. The familiar aura put them in a trance. Buzz, the temple of Heaven God Life's array emerged. It stood in front of Hades Era and Lord Go. That punch smashed onto the formation fiercely. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were filled with violence and excitement. The array operated to the extreme, emitting a dazzling light. However, crack, one crack after another appeared on the array. Hades Era soared into the sky and poured the power of the law of life into the array. The array rotated, trying its best to resist. However, a deafening rumble rang out. The temple of Heaven God Life's array still exploded. The array shattered. Heaven God Transmigration's fist was knocked away, but his excitement did not dissipate. Hades Era howled miserably and fell from the sky. Lord Go raised his paw and placed it on Hades Era's back, but both of them were still pushed toward the ground. Just when they were about to hit the ground, it was like a gust of wind. A thin figure tore through the void and emerged. He slowly raised a hand and placed it on Lord Go's back, stopping Hades Era and Lord Go from flying backward. Chapter 1694. Bufang's appearance was timely. At least, it was timely for Hades Era and Lord Go. Oh, Bufang young man, you're finally here. If you didn't come, I would have been beaten to death. The halo above Hades Era's head stared at Bufang with red eyes. Bufang lowered his hand and gave Hades Era an indifferent look. Who is this idiot? Bufang said. Lord Go's mouth twitched. Hades Era. Behind Bufang, Yun Tianyi stood in shock. She glanced at Lord Go and then at Hades Era. The terrifying aura emanating from the latter shocked her. This is another Heaven God. That rich and holy aura. It's the Heaven God of Life. My God. Has the Heaven God of Life returned as well? At the same time, terrible explosions and rumbles rang out in various parts of the chaos space. The battle had begun in an instant. Bufang young man. Don't you recognize I am Era. The handsome, cool, and awesome Era. Hades Era's eyes widened, and he almost put his head next to Bufang. Bufang pushed Era's head away grumpily. Of course, he recognized Era. But to be honest, Bufang did not expect Hades Era to be the legendary Heaven God of Life. No wonder he had an immortal life force like a cockroach. He was slapped by Heaven God Transmigration, but he was still alive. Lord Go interrupted Bufang and Hades Era's greetings. He said in an incomparably grave tone, "Stay alert. This old thief is a little strange." For the first time, Lord Go's tone was somewhat solemn. The fact that Heaven God Transmigration had fused with that arm made him feel a little uneasy. After all, the might of that arm back then had left a lingering fear in their hearts. Even the heavenly god palace had been smashed into pieces. The spell formation of the temple of heavenly god life had already been destroyed. In the sky, heaven god transmigration slowly walked down, bringing with him a terrible pressure that made people want to kneel. Yun Tianyi felt sad. She felt that it was unwise for her to join a battle of this level. The aura of soul demons, Bu Fang was very sensitive to the aura of soul demons, so he was not surprised to find the aura emanating from heaven god transmigration. After all, the calamity of soul demons in the chaotic universe was caused by heaven god transmigration. Bu Fang had long guessed that heaven god transmigration was in cahoots with the soul demon. So many lives had been slaughtered by soul demons, fallen into the transmigration, and turned into the power of this heaven god transmigration. He had to admit that this was a little crazy. "You're here. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Heaven god transmigration smiled faintly. He raised his thick soul demon arm, which emanated a sinful aura as he stared coldly at Bu Fang. His killing intent toward Bu Fang was even stronger than toward Lord Go and Hades' era. "Heaven god time, heaven god life, and that stinky chef. It's a pity that you're all missing heaven god space and heaven god destruction." Heaven god transmigration shook his head and smiled faintly. Buzz, he was no longer bound by the array. He seemed to be somewhat unrestrained. In a flash the air exploded. He moved so fast that it was difficult for the naked eye to follow him. After countless years, heaven god transmigration's strength had reached an unfathomable level. Coupled with his arm, his strength was naturally unparalleled. Bu Fang felt a blast coming at him. His starry sky spirit sea stirred. Then, a gust of wind began to howl. Rumble! In the blink of an eye, the black turtle constellation Wak spun in front of Bu Fang. Rumble! Heaven god transmigration clenched his fist and smashed it down on the Wak. The Wak fell to the ground, causing the ground to crumble and the temple of heaven god life to tremble violently. The black turtle constellation Wak only held heaven god transmigration back for a moment. The next moment, heaven god transmigration approached. Lord Go's figure flickered. He stood in front of Bu Fang. Buzz, the law of time turned into a waterfall and fell. A huge clock emerged, condensed of the law of time, and stood in front of heaven god transmigration. The law of time? Heaven god transmigration narrowed his eyes. One of his eyes was clear, but the other was scarlet and tyrannical. Facing the law of time, he threw out a punch. The clock exploded in an instant. Lord Dog's body was suddenly hit by a huge force. His body was sent flying, and a ditch was formed on the ground. Bam! Lord Go smashed into the wall, which crumbled, and Lord Go sank deep into it. Hades' era's heart was trembling. Why did you treat my temple of heaven god life like this? Hades' era was very depressed. Was the temple of heaven god life going to be reduced to ruins again when it had just recovered? Old thief. Every wrong has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. If you have what it takes, why don't we go to the temple of heaven god time and fight for 300 rounds? Hades' era roared, his hands on his slender waist. What a fool! Lord Go said. Bu Fang rolled his eyes. Yun Tianyi was speechless. Heaven god transmigration glanced indifferently at Hades' era. Then, he stomped his foot, and the ground of the temple of heaven god life crumbled in an instant. A sonic boom rang out as heaven god transmigration appeared in front of Hades' era and threw out a palm. It was a palm thrown out with the soul demon's arm, and the evil wind it produced made Hades' era's pupils constrict. Buzz, countless petals quickly gathered and blocked in front of him. However, they could not withstand the attack and were blown apart by heaven god transmigration's punch. Countless petals flew in all directions. Nether King Ha's body twisted from the slap, turning into a white shadow as he ruthlessly smashed into the wall. Invincible! At this moment, heaven god transmigration was almost invincible. The two modern-day heaven gods were no match for heaven god transmigration. My power is world-shattering. I will suppress all the worlds in the universe. Heaven god transmigration said arrogantly, his eyes brimming with scarlet energy. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at heaven god transmigration with a serious look in his eyes. Rumble. In just a flash, heaven god transmigration disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Bufang. The soul demon's arm slammed down. Bufang swung his Taotai arm and collided with it. After the collision, he was knocked flying backward and smashed into the ruins where Lord Go was. Weak. Too weak. Although you have obtained the causality thrones of 4 heaven gods, your strength is only about the same as that of an ancient heaven god. No matter how strong an ancient heaven god is, he is still an ant in front of a heaven god with a causality throne. Heaven god transmigration clenched his fists and smiled faintly. The next moment, he raised his hand and rubbed his fingers against the soul demon's arm. A black ball began to rapidly condense. The black sphere revolved, and the fluctuations it emitted were startling. The destructive aura contained within the sphere was incomparably terrifying. It's time to end this. I've been waiting for this moment for countless years. I've been looking forward to this moment ever since I banished you into transmigration. Now no one can stop me. I want to surpass the heaven gods. I want to become the lord of the chaos space. Heaven god transmigration roared. The next moment, as if his roar had reached the depths of his emotions, he threw out the black ball in his hand. It was a highly concentrated form of extremely unstable energy. Not to mention a nuclear bomb, even 100 nuclear bombs would not be as powerful as this one. If it were not in the chaos space but in the less stable starry sky, it might have destroyed countless stars at will. Era. Stop it. Suddenly in the ruins Bufang's faint voice rang out. The ruins exploded in an instant. Bufang's figure emerged, holding a dragon bone knife in his hand. Hades' Era was feeling sad at the moment. When he heard Bufang's voice, he was a little stunned. However, he did not hesitate. With a flash, he stood in front of the black ball. I'll stop it, Hades' Era said. However, I have a small request. Can you give I a spicy strip? Hades' Era seemed to be unafraid of death. His white robe flapped noisily in the wind. There were a few moments when the wind was howling and the water was freezing. Of course, that was if he did not say the last sentence. Bufang's hand shook. A golden spicy strip shot out in an instant. Hades' Era held the spicy strip in his mouth. With it, he seemed to have gained strength. Come on, treasure. Hades' Era focused his eyes. Buzz, the law of life, instantly gathered and turned into the shadow of a huge white rose behind him. Boom! The black sphere had almost crushed the void. Wherever it passed, the void would distort. It was a distortion caused by the enormous energy. Stop it? Heaven god transmigration did not take it seriously. As the black ball approached, Hades' Era stretched out both hands and pushed them forward. His palms touched the black ball. The energy in the ball began to twist. Hades' Era let out a long cry. His palms began to lose flesh and blood, leaving only the golden heaven god's bones. His flesh and blood turned into ashes in a flash. As the ball approached Hades' Era's white robe was torn to shreds, a crazed look appeared in Erha's eyes. He bit the chilly strip as hard as he could, as if he was biting down on the entire sky. Bam! Bam! Hades' Era's arms disappeared. The next moment, Era did not retreat. Instead, he advanced. He took a step forward, his body bent like a bow, and he forcibly blocked the black ball with his flesh. Even his physical body was continuously cracking under the black sphere. The disk behind him also shattered. Boom! But at least, he had blocked it. Yun Tianyi was shocked. She never expected that the silly and narcissistic guy would sacrifice his own body to block the black ball. Was he not afraid of death? Even the heaven god of life would not be able to withstand this attack. It was very likely that he would be killed by the Soul God. However, even if he knew that there would be such a consequence, Nether King Ha still stood up after hearing Bufang's call, disregarding his own safety. What kind of trust was this? Bufang glanced at Hades Era. His eyes suddenly turned sharp. Of course, he would not let Nether King Ha suffer in vain. He let out a long breath. The mental energy in his mind seemed to be boiling. Bufang's heart stirred. The dragon bone knife in his hand lashed out and tore the void apart. He reached out and clawed at the void. It was as if he was grabbing a dish from the river of time. The law of time was so strong that it could hardly spread. It wrapped around his arm. Bufang's arm, on the other hand, was aging and withering at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was time for the dish that had been preserved in the river of time to come out. Bufang's eyes suddenly turned fierce. "Come out!" Bufang roared. There seemed to be an unquestionable majesty in his eyes. A beam of golden light flashed. In the river of time, a beam of golden light shot out at a high speed. Then, it turned into a dish with a pair of energy wings in the void. That was the dish that Bufang could give up through the golden recipe. A dish that had a spirit. It seemed to hear Bufang's roar. Bufang reached out a hand, grabbed it, and dragged it out of the river of time. Countless streams of the power of time piled up, making Bufang's arm look old and tender again. It had been baptized by time. Boom! Finally, the river of time collapsed. That dish was pulled out by Bufang. Lord Go dashed out of the ruins. "Lord Go, eat this dish," Bufang said seriously. Then, he threw it out. The golden dish turned into a stream of light, shooting toward Lord Go. Lord Go looked at Hades Era, who was risking his life to block the energy attack. His eyes turned red in an instant. His body suddenly enlarged, and he opened his mouth, swallowing the golden dish in one gulp. The dish entered his stomach. Golden energy ripples instantly spread out. The law of time was like boiling water, rolling and surging. Chapter 1695. That was because Lord Go swallowed the dish too fast. Moreover, it was covered by the golden light, so no one could see clearly what that dish was. Only Lord Go knew. The familiar taste, the feeling of the food slowly flowing in his mouth, and the rich aroma that gushed out were all like a message to Lord Go. The dish that entered his mouth was cooked by Bufang with the golden recipe. It was not a strange dish. It was sweet and sour ribs. A bowl of sweet and sour ribs made him as happy as an immortal. In that instant, Lord Dog couldn't help but want to let out a distant bark. He had never thought that he would be able to eat a bowl of sweet and sour ribs. The recipe that had been kept in the Temple of Heaven God Time for so long was actually the sweet and sour ribs that he had been longing for? Lord Go's fur was shaking. At this moment, the law of time, which had been dormant for a long time, suddenly soared. Lord Go opened his eyes. His pitch-black fur seemed to have become shiny. The dog's paws had become much longer. The law of time wound around his paws and turned into many circles, each of which contained an incomparably terrifying aura. Bufang exhaled. His arm was old and rotten, like the arm of an old man. After cooking the dish, he directly stored it in the void. The law of time enveloped the dish, which made Bufang feel the power of time even when he went to pick it up himself. However, Bufang was fine. He took a deep breath, and the laws of time surged, sweeping across his arm. Instantly, his decaying arm was restored, and filled with life force once again. Lord Go had eaten that dish. Now it should be time for some changes, Bufang thought to himself. He looked expectantly in Lord Go's direction. He wanted to see how much Lord Go would recover after eating the dish marked on the golden recipe. Moreover, that dish, the corners of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. Following the recipe, Bufang's final dish was sweet and sour ribs. Even Bufang himself did not expect this. Fortunately, it was sweet and sour ribs, which allowed Bu Fong to complete the last step of cooking at the last critical moment. After all, Bu Fong was too familiar with the cooking of sweet and sour ribs. Every step seemed to be engraved in his heart. Boom, boom, boom. Hades' era's life force surged. It was contending against the black energy ball, and it looked like it would be annihilated at any moment. Heaven God Transmigration, on the other hand, was not looking at Hades' era but at Lord Go in the distance. The changes that were happening to Lord Go's body were what had attracted his attention. Heaven God Transmigration narrowed his eyes. That familiar feeling seemed to have returned. Bang! A river of time tore through the chaos space and fell from the sky. Like a rolling river flowing east, it swirled around Lord Go, causing Lord Go's originally weak aura to rise. The digestion of the food made Lord Go's incomplete causality throne gradually perfect, and it even reached a state of perfection. Buzz, Lord Go did not transform into a humanoid shadow. He was still in the form of a big black dog. However, a light disk of law appeared over the dog's head, which rotated slowly and cast down a powerful aura. In the blink of an eye, Lord Dog became somewhat holy and experienced. Rumble! The river of time swirled. Lord Dog strode forward with graceful cat-like step. Step by step, it was as if he was a devil. He swayed his butt as he walked out. Heaven God Time, in his prime, had returned. At this moment, the entire chaos space seemed to tremble. Yun Tianyi wept tears of joy as she watched from below. That familiar, powerful aura. It was none other than Heaven God Time at his prime. This was the heavenly time god who could reverse time with a single thought. Powerful. Too powerful. Boom. An explosion erupted. Hades' era was instantly blown into a cloud of ashes by the black energy ball. However, after a while, Hades' era, who was standing next to Bu Fong, slowly gathered and transformed into Hades' era. As one of the 5 heaven gods, Heaven God Life was the least likely to die. Naturally, he would not be destroyed so easily. The energy of the explosion began to leak out. It turned into mighty ripples of energy that spread in all directions. The temple of Heaven God Life seemed to be completely destroyed at this moment. Hades' era trembled with pain. However, there was nothing he could do. Heaven God Transmigration was simply too powerful. If they did not fully return, they would not have a chance to deal with Heaven God Transmigration. In fact, even if they all returned, it would be very difficult for them to win. However, he could pin his hopes on Lord Go. After all, among the 5 heaven gods, Lord Go was the strongest. Lord Dog's strength could be said to be the strongest, even stronger than Old Thief Samsara. Of course, that was before Old Thief Transmigration fused with the Soul Demon's arm. Buzz, the ripples of energy spread out. Everything it covered, including the Temple of Heaven God Life, was instantly reduced to ashes by a flick of a sleeve. Lord Go narrowed his eyes. His tail wagged in the air. He raised his exquisite dog paw and lightly touched the ripple. Crack! It was as if it had been frozen. The boiling energy ripples all stopped moving. Lord Go looked at Heaven God Transmigration calmly. Do you regret what you have done now? Lord Go stopped the energy ripples and looked at Heaven God Transmigration in the distance. Now that he had completely returned, he had the strength and capital to confront Heaven God Transmigration. Even though Heaven God Life had fused with the arm, he was not of the same race, and his heart was not so easy to fuse with. Regret? Of course I regret it. I regret that I didn't remember what you had become when I sent you into the transmigration. I should have killed you before you returned. That way there would have been no more trouble. Heaven God Transmigration sneered. Lord Dog shook his head. He slowly opened his mouth, revealing his sharp canine teeth. If that's the case, I'll kill you. It's time for Heaven God Transmigration to have a new god to replace him, Lord Go said domineeringly. He strode across the void with his elegant cat-like step. The next moment, Lord Go disappeared from where he was. Buzz, even the void seemed to be shattered by the explosion. Lord Go moved so fast that he appeared in front of Heaven God Transmigration in the blink of an eye. The two's laws collided with each other. The battle between heavenly deities was evenly matched, and they were evenly matched. Energy ripples spread out in all directions. Heaven God Transmigration tried to use the Soul Demon's arm, but Lord Go blocked it every time. Buzz, Lord Go drew a circle in the void with his paw. The circle flew out and instantly enveloped everything that was crumbling. Wherever the circle passed, all the ruins seemed to be recovering rapidly. The shattered rubble was also recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye, piling up with a crashing sound. It was as if time was flowing backward. Heaven God Transmigration's pupils constricted. He moved a great distance away and looked at the circle of light from a distance. The temple of Heaven God Life, which had been crumbling, was restored at this moment. Even the shattered array formation was still intact. Down below, Hades' era was overjoyed. He did not expect such a drastic change. "Oh, my temple of Heaven God Life is back." Hades' era was pleasantly surprised. Bufang, on the other hand, was staring at the battle with rapt attention. At this moment, Lord Go seemed to be conducting a tutorial on the use of the law of time. Every wisp of time divine power was used by him to a very precise degree. "The law of time," Heaven God Transmigration said coldly. The true heavenly time god really was just as powerful as him. Back then, if it weren't for that palm heavily injuring the 4 Empyrean gods, his samsara wouldn't have had the chance to pick up the slack and send the other Empyrean gods into the cycle of reincarnation. Although the arm had been transplanted to his own arm, it was still not enough. But it couldn't be fused with strength. There would always be some deviation, and this deviation would cause his strength to increase, but compared to before the fusion, it would only be a little stronger. Lord Go strode like a cat. With every step, there seemed to be time ripples spreading. The aura of time was the flavor of the vast expanse. Heaven God Transmigration kept moving sideways, and the law of transmigration fell from behind him. Buzz, the transmigration law, instantly rushed out and collided with Lord Go's time law. 2 supreme laws collided. It emitted a soundless fluctuation. The cycle law was devoured by the time law. At the point of impact, the void began to distort. Heaven God Transmigration's pupils constricted. Impossible! Heaven God Transmigration never thought that his power of law could not resist a dog who had been exiled for tens of thousands of years. Lord Go continued to draw circles. He slapped the air with his exquisite paw. The circles enveloped Heaven God Transmigration's body. Buzz, Heaven God Transmigration's face twisted. He found that his body seemed to have become distorted. Some parts of his body became like a newborn baby, or an old man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life. It was the power of time that was constantly affecting his body. However, he would soon break free. Although the law of time was powerful, it was still very difficult to completely change a heaven god. However, after a few exchanges, Heaven God Transmigration also sensed that something was wrong. You've become stronger." Heaven God Transmigration was shocked as he dragged the huge arm. Lord Go was very calm. He had indeed become stronger. He was no longer the Heaven God time he used to be. "I have to thank you for your transmigration. Without your help, perhaps even if I recovered, my strength would only be the same as before. But now, Lord Go, I have returned in glory, and with the power of sweet and sour ribs. I am no longer someone I could compare with in the past. I have become stronger," Lord Go said lightly. He raised his paw and pointed at Heaven God Transmigration's soul demon arm. "That is not yours, so it's useless no matter how you fuse with it. What doesn't suit you is not suitable for you. Forcibly fusing with it will only make your power of law weaker and weaker, and you will not be able to exert more strength." Heaven God Transmigration covered his head with both hands. He was a little confused at the moment. There was always a majestic voice in his mind that was affecting his consciousness. Damn it. Bullshit. I am the strongest. I am the strongest in the chaos space. I am the lord of the chaos space. Heaven God Transmigration's face became very ferocious. Down below, with a spicy strip dangling from his lips, Hades Era looked at the ferocious Heaven God Transmigration and shook his head. What a poor young man. He lacks the most basic self-awareness. Why doesn't he think that the power that can injure 5 heaven gods is really that easy to control? Bufang, on the other hand, was very calm. He could tell at a glance that Heaven God Transmigration's state was not right. As the supreme law of the chaotic universe, the law of transmigration was very proud. How could it accept the fusion of another power? Perhaps the transplant did not affect him much. However, as time went by, the rejection between the law of transmigration and the soul demon power would become more and more intense. In the end, it might even cause Heaven God Transmigration's body to explode. The consequence of the rejection was an explosion. Bufang estimated that the power would be enough to destroy half of the chaos space. After all, a supreme law carried too many things. The collapse of the law of transmigration was no small matter. It would at least cause the chaotic universe to lose billions of years of evolution. The Lord of the Chaos Space? Lord Go sneered. He raised his paw. The small and exquisite dog paws were constantly radiating brilliance in the air. Buzz, the law of time kept swirling. Soon, it gathered into the shape of a dog's paw. It was a dog's paw condensed from time. Under the influence of the paw, time flowed faster in the surroundings. Let Lord Go give you a hand. Stupid Lord of the Chaos Space. Lord Go said disdainfully. As the dog's paw swung out, the flow of time skyrocketed under this paw. Get lost. Heaven God Transmigration became extremely irritable. He raised his soul demon arm and slapped at the dog's paw. However, like flowing water, the dog's paw flowed into his arm. All of a sudden, Heaven God Transmigration's body froze. Chapter 1696. Sometimes people loved and hated time at the same time. At least at this moment, Heaven God Transmigration detested time. Lord Go's claw had sped up the flow of time and poured it into his soul demon arm. Heaven God Transmigration felt as if his head was about to explode. His eyes turned bloodshot as the rumbling kept ringing in his head. Time passed slowly, causing his body to become more and more illusory. Red lines emerged on his arm, which became more and more ferocious, beating like a heart. What have you done? Heaven God Transmigration's pupils constricted, and he covered his head with one hand. His pupils were narrowed and filled with pain. It was real pain, and he felt as if his head was about to explode. The deafening voice kept ringing out as if to tempt and abduct him. Accept me. I can give you strength. Fuse with me, and you will become the true lord of the chaos space. Accept my strength, and no one can stop you. The voice was gentle and magnetic, making Heaven God Transmigration tremble all over. The law of transmigration went berserk, and the power of sin surged. When the two energies collided, Heaven God Transmigration's body seemed to crack, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Lord Go hovered in midair, walking slowly. With his strength restored, he was supreme. With him around, the whole chaos space seemed to have calmed down a lot. Hades' Era soared into the sky and landed at Lord Go's side. What's wrong with this old thief? Hades' Era was pleased to see Heaven God Transmigration's pained look. His enemy's injury was his pleasure. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and raised them. In the distance, a rumbling sound came from the ruins. The ground cracked, and with a thud, the black turtle constellation walk flew into Bufang's hand. Hades' Era's eyelids twitched when he saw the big hole the black turtle constellation walk had made. This must be the backlash. How dare he touch the power of a soul demon? What a fool! Bufang said coldly. Lord Go nodded. They had all experienced the evil of the soul demons. The spatial passages leading to the chaotic universe were sealed by them, which prevented the calamity of the soul demons from spreading. If the soul overlords of the 7 great sins of the soul demon universe descended, the people would be plunged into misery and suffering. After all, every great soul overlord was equivalent to a modern-day heaven god. Rumble. Heaven god Transmigration's body began to swell. Obviously, under the catalysis of time, his control over his own strength was becoming weaker and weaker. Once the power exploded, it was very likely that he would die. Of course, the premise was that Heaven God Transmigration was greedy for the soul demon's power. He was, after all, a heaven god. As long as he cut off the soul demon's arm and gave up his power, he could still recover after a long time. However, if he didn't chop off his arm, he would basically die. Would Heaven God Transmigration give up his arm? Bufang and the rest did not know. They squinted at him. The Lord Go had deployed a barrier around Heaven God Transmigration, sealing off all the energy. The explosion of such energy would not destroy the primal chaos. Crack, crack, cracks began to appear on Heaven God Transmigration's face. Oh! Bufang and the others focused their eyes. It has begun, said the Lord Go. The backlash of the energy began to destroy Heaven God Transmigration's body. In the sky, Heaven God Transmigration covered his head with one hand and kept coughing up blood. The terrible power made him extremely uncomfortable. Why? He had been plotting for countless years. Why didn't it work? He had sacrificed so many living beings and devoured so many transmigrating creatures. Why couldn't he succeed? Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were bloodshot. He covered his head with both hands and his temples bulged. Blood-colored patterns kept covering his body, making him look like a ferocious demon. He's crazy. This old thief. Why is he so obsessed with power? Hades' Era covered his mouth with a hand, a look of disbelief on his face. If this goes on, he's really going to die. This is the consequence of greed. Even gods are no exception. The power of soul demons is born because of this. The 7 sins, greed, sloth, arrogance, and so on, are all based on the most primitive emotions and desires of human beings. The Lord Go sighed with emotion. Give it up, the Lord Go said to Heaven God Transmigration. The power of soul demons is not something gods can control. It is a repulsive force, scram. Heaven God Transmigration growled. His eyes were bloodshot and he kept roaring. He was on the verge of tearing his skin apart. Even the gray transmigration seemed to be stained with black, turning it into a very strange color. I want to become the lord of the primal chaos. I want power. Heaven God Transmigration roared into the sky. Roar. A terrifying aura exploded from his body, as if he was going to destroy everything. Heaven and earth began to tremble at this moment. The Lord Go's eyes grew more and more serious. This lunatic, Hades' Era twitched his mouth. All of a sudden, the expressions of Bufang and the others changed dramatically. He's really crazy this time, the Lord Go said. Under his solemn gaze, Heaven God Transmigration grinned coldly. He abruptly stretched out his hand and stabbed it into his chest. His chest shattered in an instant, and blood and flesh flew in all directions. A beating heart was plucked out by him, and with a sudden squeeze, the heart was instantly crushed. It turned into a pile of broken flesh and blood. After the heart was crushed, an invisible force seemed to break free from Heaven God Transmigration's body. It was an extremely bizarre feeling. The gray transmigration grew weaker and weaker. Even the speed of its rotation became much slower. With a slash, the power of the law of transmigration seemed to strip Heaven God Transmigration's body. I want power! Heaven God Transmigration laughed wildly. Hades' era sucked in a cold breath. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. The Lord Go's eyes narrowed, and there was a look of disappointment in them. Idiot. In the end, the three of them could only come to this conclusion. Yun Tianyi was stunned. She never thought that Heaven God Transmigration would choose to strip away the power of the law of transmigration and choose the power of the soul demon. Is this guy's head stuffed with shit? Hades' era was somewhat speechless. Roar. He roared. A slash rang out. There seemed to be an invisible force tearing it apart, and the gray reincarnation was peeled off. With quick reflexes, Bu Fang stepped forward and soared into the sky. He raised his hand, and the power of the law of transmigration immediately enveloped the stripped transmigration. Heaven God Transmigration covered his face with one hand. Without the power of the law of transmigration, his causality throne began to crumble. In the end, it completely shattered and merged with the chaos space. Under the control of Bu Fang's transmigration power, the law of transmigration, which had lost its support, slowly merged with the chaos space. Lord Go, I really didn't expect that a heaven god would choose the power of the soul demon and give up the power of his own origin. Lord Go felt a little lost. He will regret it, Bu Fang said faintly. After losing the power of the law of transmigration, Heaven God Transmigration was completely controlled by the soul demon arm, and his body had completely fused with the power of the soul demon. Heaven God Transmigration's aura began to change, becoming stronger and stronger. Good boy. Feel the power. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were scarlet. Like a child, he listened excitedly to the voice in his head. Swoosh. Suddenly, a pair of wings burst open behind him, revealing a transparent membrane that emitted an evil aura. Heaven God Transmigration looked at his own body with an infatuated look. Buzz, suddenly, Lord Go disappeared. When he reappeared, he was right next to Heaven God Transmigration and slammed his paw down. Before this, Lord Go dared not to make a move on his own, fearing that the backlash would break out and destroy half of the chaos space. But now, Heaven God Transmigration had chosen to give up the power of the law of transmigration. Such a foolish act had completely angered Lord Go. He had to kill him now before he could completely fuse with the power of the law of transmigration. Hades' era moved as well. Kill him while he's down. He was very familiar with this method. Rumble. Heaven God Transmigration was instantly knocked to the ground by Lord Go and Hades' era. The law of time and the law of life made Heaven God Transmigration howl in pain. Suddenly, the arm began to grow bigger and bigger. For a moment, it seemed to pierce through the chaos space. The huge arm was wrapped in sinful energy. Heaven God Transmigration dragged the huge arm with a ferocious look on his face. This feels so good. Heaven God Transmigration grinned, revealing his sharp teeth. All of a sudden, the law of time abruptly descended. Time seemed to have turned into sharp blades that were about to cut off Heaven God Transmigration's arm. Hades' era and Lord Go attacked together. Puff, puff, black smoke filled the air. The whole chaos space seemed to have noticed this scene at this moment. Many experts who were fighting were dumbfounded. What happened? At this moment, the experts who had submitted to Heaven God Transmigration felt a binding force leave them. After Heaven God Transmigration abandoned the law of transmigration, the binding force on them disappeared. Everyone was in an uproar. What kind of monster is that? Heaven God Transmigration? That's the disgusting thing we've submitted to. Those who are not of our race must have a different heart. That's a soul demon. He's a sinful creature. Everyone was filled with righteous indignation. If Heaven God Transmigration was still a heaven god, they would still submit to him. However, he was no longer a heaven god. A soul demon? They had to kill him. The two sides who were fighting made peace in an instant. The 9 ancient heaven gods sealed by Lord Go were stunned. They could not believe that Heaven God Transmigration was this kind of person. What were they? They had given everything to the Heaven God for so many years, but had they all been fed to a dog? Had Heaven God Transmigration's conscience been fed to a dog? Puff! The law of time and the law of life collided. In an instant, the arm was torn apart as if it was about to be separated from Heaven God Transmigration's body. Swoosh, however, just as it was about to be separated, the arm wriggled and suddenly healed. Then, an increasingly terrifying aura burst out of Heaven God Transmigration's body as he woke up. The Lord Go, Hades era, and the countless creatures in the chaos space, they were all stunned at this moment. All of them felt their hair stand on end. This aura was exactly the same as the aura that had caused chaos in the chaos space. The chaos of the chaos space was about to reappear. Chapter 1697. A terrible aura pervaded the sky. All eyes rested on Heaven God Transmigration. No, this fellow could no longer be called Heaven God Transmigration because he had given up the power of transmigration and chosen the power of the soul demon. He became neither a human nor a ghost, although he had obtained great power. Although he had gained great power in the eyes of the others, the price was too high. Heaven God Transmigration's subordinates were somewhat dumbfounded and unwilling. They did not expect him to make such a choice. For a moment they felt a chill in their hearts. When they recalled what Heaven God Transmigration had done, they felt that their hands were stained with sin and blood. Heaven God Transmigration's laughter rang out in the void. Lord Go and Hades era had joined forces to attack him. However, Heaven God Transmigration had become even stronger, perhaps because he had fused with the power. One punch after another, he almost knocked Lord Go and Hades era flying away. His power was beyond everyone's expectations. Without the power of the law of transmigration, no other power could repel the power of the soul demon. As a result, Heaven God Transmigration's strength became even more terrifying. He had almost become a great soul overlord. Boom! Many places in the chaos space were shattered, and the experts were thrown into the distance. Lord Go and Hades era looked very serious. Bufang stood in the distance with his hands clasped behind his back, his brows furrowed. The battle continued, and the sky was dark and gloomy. The experts in the chaos space could not stand Heaven God Transmigration, who had abandoned the law of transmigration. A group of people surrounded him and kept attacking him. Heaven God Transmigration's subordinates had also become his opponents, and they all launched attacks at him. Streams of the power of the law rushed into the sky and shook heaven and earth. However, Heaven God Transmigration remained calm even though he was enveloped by such an attack. He felt that he had reached another level. These people could not even break his defense. Lord Go was still fighting, while Hades era landed at Bufang's side, panting. Bufang, young man. This guy is so hard. Hades era said. His eyes were solemn, as if he was facing a great enemy. The power of the soul demon's arm has fused with Heaven God Transmigration. Although the fusion is not complete, Heaven God Transmigration is already very strong now. The characteristics of soul demons are that they are tough and difficult to deal with, Bufang said. He looked up at Heaven God Transmigration, who was fighting against tens of thousands of enemies alone. At the very least, in terms of power, his opponent had made the right bet. By abandoning the power of reincarnation, he had obtained even greater power. Heaven God Transmigration narrowed his eyes as he felt the power spreading through his arm. He raised his hand. He grabbed a deity emperor by the neck. He opened his mouth, revealing his sharp teeth, and bit down. With a poochie sound, blood splattered everywhere. Everyone went crazy and panicked. Heaven God Transmigration had really been assimilated by the soul demon, and now he was no different from a soul demon. It's so delicious. I'm so hungry. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were scarlet. His figure exploded in the sky. Every single move crushed a God King or God Emperor to death. Lord, go move. He slapped his paw at Heaven God Transmigration, knocking him flying away and sending him crashing into the chaos space. Rumble. The whole chaos space seemed to tremble violently. It was that paw that smashed the Heaven God Temple, and it exuded the aura of a soul demon. This meant that the soul demons had set their eyes on the chaotic universe. This was not good news for Lord Go and the other heaven gods. Rumble. Huge chains of time descended, wrapping around Heaven God Transmigration. Heaven God Transmigration was trapped on the ground. Lord Go attacked by force, intending to suppress and seal Heaven God Transmigration. But he failed. He broke free from the chains of time and burst into pieces. Heaven God Transmigration rushed up into the sky. He was becoming less and less human now. Bufang did not stay to watch the show. He had to get ready to attack because he felt that Heaven God Transmigration was trying to escape. He wanted to tear the barrier and escape from the chaos space. The chaos space, which he was once proud of, had now become a means to restrain him. However, once he escaped from the primal chaos space, he would truly be like a fish in the ocean. It would be extremely difficult to capture him again. Once he completely recovered his arm and power, he would certainly bring terror and disaster to the universe. Ordinary people did not even dare to think about that. A modern-day heaven god had fled and was hiding in the dark. If he did not want to be found, no one would be able to find him. Therefore, Bufang felt that he had to capture him. Of course, in fact, Bufang had his eyes on the arm that Heaven God Transmigration had fused with. Since it could make Heaven God Transmigration's power so strong, it was very likely that it was not as simple as the arm of a great soul overlord. It was even possible that it was the legendary arm of Soul God. He had heard that Soul God was full of malice toward him, so Bufang naturally did not mind roasting this arm. Well, he would roast it like roasting a pig's trotter. Of course, before that, Bufang had to defeat Heaven God Transmigration first. If Heaven God Transmigration was still Heaven God Transmigration, Bufang might find it tricky. But when dealing with soul demons, Bufang had always had a natural advantage. Perhaps even Heaven God Transmigration did not expect this advantage. You go first. I'll be right there. Bufang glanced at Hades' Era and said to him. Era gave Bufang a suspicious look, then rushed into the sky. He and Heaven God Transmigration began to fight. Meanwhile, Bufang took out Pride Great Soul Overlord's body, which he had obtained a long time ago. Buzz, the dragon bone kitchen knife buzzed. Bufang's eyes narrowed. With a ripping motion, he removed all the bones from Pride Great Soul Overlord's body. Little Hu and Xiaopi lay on Bufang's shoulders and watched curiously. Bufang laid the body flat on the white tiger heaven stove. Bufang's hand shook. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun in his hand, drew an arc in the air, and then slashed down. Clatter, 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 the knife's shadow seemed to disappear. In a flash, Bufang's arm seemed to have turned into 1,000 arms. Every time the knife fell, the Soul Overlord's body would be chopped into pieces. It was as if he was chopping beef into pieces. Clatter, clatter, clatter. He chopped up a pile of minced meat. Then, he swung the kitchen knife horizontally from the bottom to the top and fiercely scraped the meat from the bottom. He threw the pile of meat on top of it and continued to chop it down with the knife. He chopped the meat more finely. Little Hu squeaked as if he was curious about what Bufang was going to cook. Your favorite. Bufang glanced at Little Hu, and the corners of his mouth curved upward slightly. However, this time, he was not going to use beef, but Soul Overlord meat. This time, he was going to let Little Hu spit as much as he wanted. Bufang's eyes lit up, and there was an inexplicable anticipation in his heart. Little Hu's eyes also lit up, and he was also looking forward to it. Xiaopi, who was spitting bubbles, was a little confused. Why are this man and this fox communicating with their eyes? Bufang's movements were very fast and smooth. Even though it was the Soul Overlord meat, Bufang could clearly capture the flow of energy in it. Moreover, he was able to use the energy reasonably. Soon, the Soul Overlord's body was turned into a large pile of minced meat by Bufang. The size of each piece of minced meat was very uniform, and the energy distribution was also very balanced. Bufang washed his hands with the spring of life. He began to knead the minced meat. Before long, he had produced many small, round Soul Overlord meatballs. Little Hu kept jumping on Bufang's shoulder, rubbing his two little paws in front of his chest as if he was following Bufang's rhythm. Soon, the blue and white porcelain bowl was full of Soul Overlord meatballs. The enormous energy wrapped around each Soul Overlord meatball was extremely frightening, even if it was not cooked. Bufang rubbed his fingers. Then, a scarlet flame rose and burned in his hand. With a flick of his finger, the flame jumped into the black turtle constellation wok. The water in the wok was boiling. Bufang hesitated for a moment, then threw all the Soul Overlord meatballs into the wok. He stirred the meatballs with the Qilin transmigration ladle, his movements neither fast nor slow. The meatballs in the wok were milky white, and crystal-clear energy swirled around them. When he fished them out, the meatballs actually floated up into the air. They were transparent like glass beads, glowing brightly. The scarlet divine flame roasted the meatball, burning all the moisture in the meatball. Then, Bufang poured the oil that he had carefully cooked into the wok. This oil was made from the fat of a god-king-level spirit beast. He poured the meatballs into the wok. The oil in the wok began to boil, bubbling with white foam. Meatballs were Little Hu's favorite. At this moment, the little fellow was holding Bufang's head tightly, wagging his little tail. He was very excited, and his little eyes were full of joy. He opened his mouth, and saliva kept flowing out. Bufang was amused by his gluttonous appearance. However, the aroma of the meatballs in the wok was really strong. It was a bit like when an egg was fried in the wok. When that aroma rushed into one's nose, it was difficult to suppress. It was as if it flowed in one's blood. Buzz. Bufang's eyes focused. He raised his hand. The power of the law kept gathering. The power of the law and the array to enhance the power of the soul demon meatballs. The law of destruction was naturally the best choice. By fusing the law of destruction into the soul demon meatballs, coupled with the explosion of the gourmet array, the meatballs were suddenly filled with terrible explosive energy. If one was not careful, they could even cause the meatballs to explode. Of course, it was also a kind of extreme delicacy. Little Hu, open your mouth! Shouted Bufang. Little Hu's eyes lit up as he held Bufang's head. He jumped up and soared into the air. His little claws swam to both sides like a breaststroke, and he soon swam in front of Bufang, looking at Bufang eagerly. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He flicked his finger. Puff! The oil in the wok exploded. One soul demon meatball after another shot out. Little Hu opened his mouth solemnly. Beep, 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 one by one, the meatballs entered her mouth, and her neck bulged up and down unceasingly. Every time he swallowed a soul demon meatball, Little Hu's eyes lit up. In the end, even Little Hu's hair turned scarlet. That was the heaven god's blood surging in his body. Swoosh, the last spinning soul demon meatball shot out of the wok. Little Hu swooped over and swallowed it in one gulp. Then, he fell into Bufang's arms. Narrowing his eyes, he snuggled comfortably. This gluttonous little fellow. She really ate all of them. Bufang could not help but click his tongue. That was the corpse of a great soul overlord, and this little fellow had swallowed it all. On Bufang's shoulder, Xiaopi glanced at Little Hu, rolled his eyes, and seemed somewhat disdainful. Rumble! In the distant sky, Lord Go and Hades' era were entangled with heaven god transmigration. The latter was exerting the power of sin, causing half of the chaos space to turn pitch black. A roar rang out. Heaven God Transmigration's arms swelled up. He knocked Lord Go and Hades' era away. Bam! Bam! Lord Go fell to the ground, which kept crumbling. Hades' era, on the other hand, was knocked flying and rolled a few times. The faces of all the people in the chaos space flickered. Even two modern-day heaven gods could not stop this traitorous heaven god transmigration? What should they do? If they let this fellow escape, all the secrets of the chaos space would be exposed to the soul demons. It would be a disaster for the chaotic universe. When that happened, heaven god transmigration would return with an army of soul demons, and the chaos space would be powerless to resist. Heaven god transmigration's body was crumbling slightly. This was the backlash of the arm fusion. However, he was very excited now. He panted. The soul demon raised his arm and tore the void. The void was suddenly torn apart, and the stable space in the primal chaos was forcibly torn open to reveal a passage. Buzz, heaven god transmigration, stared at the passage, his pupils constricting. He stepped into it expectantly. Just you wait. The position of the Lord of the Chaos Space belongs to me. When I return, it will be the day you die. I will be back. Heaven God Transmigration said solemnly. The next moment, he was about to step into the rift and escape. Suddenly, an indifferent voice resounded. Did I say you could go? Heaven God Transmigration paused. Everyone in the surroundings froze and raised their heads to take a look. Bufang's face was calm. He was holding Little Hu in his arms. Little Hu's cheeks were bulging, her eyes were wide, and her little tail was wagging from side to side. Her legs were held by Bufang with one hand, and Bufang was holding her belly with the other. As for her claws, they were stretched forward as if she was about to fly. Who do you think you are? A modern-day heaven god made of trash wants to stop me? How ridiculous! Heaven God Transmigration sneered. Then, he was about to step into the rift and escape. Suddenly, Bufang shook his head. I'm being looked down upon. I'm really unhappy, I don't like it, Bufang said lightly. Then, he raised his palm and gently slapped Little Hu's buttock. Little Hu's eyes widened in an instant. Da-da-da-da-da. Chapter 1698. What is this stinky chef trying to do? Heaven God Transmigration paused. He did not take Bufang seriously at all. Although he could not kill Bufang now, Bufang was just a heaven god who was a mixture of several modern-day heaven gods. He was not afraid of him at all. What puzzled him was that this guy still dared to make his presence known in front of him. Also, did he think he would stay obediently by pointing at him with a Little Hu fox? How naive! Heaven God Transmigration sneered. The soul demon clenched his fist, and the void shattered. Half of his body had slipped into the spatial rift. Inside, energy was constantly sweeping and surging, possessing the power to destroy heaven and earth. However, when it hit him, it felt like an itch. Suddenly, Heaven God Transmigration paused. He raised his head slightly and looked into the distance. There, the stinky chef raised his hand and slapped the fox's butt. Da-da-da-da. The fox's mouth opened wide, and one golden meatball after another flew out of her mouth. What the hell? A meatball? Heaven God Transmigration was confused. He was confused. So, is this chef going to kill me with a bunch of meatballs? Kill a heaven god with a meatball? How could this chef think of that? It was not just Heaven God Transmigration. The people around them were speechless when they found out that Bufang was going to use the fox's meatballs to stop Heaven God Transmigration, whom even Heaven God Time could not stop. Is he a fool? Does he think Heaven God Transmigration is a fool? Heaven God Transmigration is a respectable man. Can't he show me some respect? Rumble. A whistling sound rang out. One harmless meatball after another shot out of the void. They moved so fast that they swept across the void, stirring up a gentle ripple of energy. Half of Heaven God Transmigration's body was suspended in midair. he sneered. Then, he raised his hand and slapped the meatball. Meatballs! You should keep them for yourself. Heaven God, Samsara said. He did not sense any danger from the meatball. Then, he thrust out his palm. The meatball was too fast. Puff, puff, puff. It struck Heaven God Transmigration's palm, but it was torn apart. Heaven God Transmigration was stunned. Everyone around them was stunned. Little Who. Spray him to death. Avenge your brother Era. Hades Era burst out laughing. He stood up with his hands on his waist and laughed out loud. Lord Go was also looking forward to it. Under normal circumstances, Bufang would not have allowed Little Who to spit because Lord Go knew very well that the meatball was not powerful enough to defeat Heaven God Transmigration. But that's not beef meatballs. That's right. Lord Go and Hades Era instantly discovered the difference. The meatballs that Little Who spat out were not beef meatballs. Boom. The explosion came as no surprise. The entire primal chaos began to tremble at this moment. Countless rays of light were dazzling and blinding everyone's eyes. Everyone was dumbfounded at this moment, and they were left with nothing but confusion. They could not believe that the power of the meatball was so terrifying. Boom. Boom. Little Who was still spitting out meatballs. She had swallowed all the meatballs cooked by the Great Soul Overlord's corpse. She did not even know how many meatballs she had saved up. She kept spitting them out, and each one seemed to shatter the void. Explosive energy kept sweeping across the primal chaos. There was even the aura of soul demons among them. However, there was a rich meaty aroma that blanketed the entire primal chaos. It smells so good. What is this smell? Why does it smell so good? My heart has been itching for a long time. Meatballs smell so good. For the gods in the primal chaos, the aroma permeated the air. But for Heaven God Transmigration, what he was feeling right now was the stench of something foul. The stench enveloped him in all directions, making it hard for him to breathe. It almost drove him crazy. It stinks. It stinks. Heaven God Transmigration flew into a rage. His stomach convulsed as if it was about to overturn the sea and pour out at any moment. That uncomfortable feeling made him feel incomparably uncomfortable. Even his pores seemed to be absorbing the stench. This stench, it simply, made him want to die. As a chef, why did he poop? When Heaven God Transmigration saw the intoxicated looks on the faces of the people down below, he felt as if he had seen a ghost. He had no idea what the aroma meant to soul demons. Suddenly, a meatball shot over and was stuffed into his mouth in an instant. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes widened. An explosion rang out. The huge energy blasted him away, and he was blasted out of the void alive. His bloodied appearance was no longer as high-spirited and vigorous as before. The void continued to crumble and crumble. Heaven God Transmigration felt that the disgusting smell was flowing all over his body. He had thought that meatballs were not very powerful. But, the instant it exploded, he was horrified to realize how terrifying it was. This is the meat of a great soul overlord. Heaven God Transmigration stared incredulously at Bufang in the distance. Even though there were countless meatballs between him and Bufang, he did not dare to touch Bufang. Yes, it's the meat of a great soul overlord. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. In his arms, Little Who's head was shaking up and down, and holy light was spewing out of her mouth. She only stopped when Bufang gently patted her on the shoulder. Her mouth was slightly open, and hot steam rose from it as saliva dripped down her face. Little Who's eyes darted up and down. Perhaps she was nodding her head so hard that she felt a little dizzy. She was waving her claws as if asking Bufang, "Is it over?" In the distance, explosions kept ringing out, and each explosion caused the void to collapse. Heaven God Transmigration was trapped in a vortex of energy. Under such circumstances, he could not continue traveling through the void. It was very likely that his body would be torn apart by the energy of the void. The smoke and dust cleared. Heaven God Transmigration's face was miserable. His flesh was riddled with holes, and blood kept flowing out of them. The explosion of the soul demon meatballs had caused serious damage to his body. Well done, little who is a fox. After this battle, I will treat you to spicy strips. Hades Era's eyes lit up. As soon as Hades Era said that, little who burped and smoke spread out. Boom! Heaven God Transmigration took a step forward and fled into the distance. Bufang focused his eyes. With little who in his arms, he gently raised his hand and patted little who's butt. Keep going. Don't stop. Bufang said. Burp. Little who burp. Little who had been stuck for a while, finally recovered. Bufang stepped into the air, keeping a distance from Heaven God Transmigration. Every meatball exploded on Heaven God Transmigration's body, causing little who to keep bursting. The latter fled with his hands over his head. Heaven God Transmigration's heart was filled with hatred. He had fused with the arm. He had mastered supreme strength. He felt that he was invincible. He was the lord of the chaos space. But why was he being chased by a fox's meatball? Suddenly, a meatball broke his defense. It sank deep into his muscles. It exploded in his muscles. Heaven God Transmigration howled miserably. That fragrance even flowed through his body. Blurg, Heaven God Transmigration lay prone in midair, vomiting until the sky darkened. One meatball after another sank deep into his skin. It exploded. The fused soul demon arm, which the Lord Go and Hades Era could not tear off no matter how hard they tried. It was actually broken by a few meatballs. Heaven God Transmigration howled miserably. All the people down below did not know what to say. Suddenly, the broken arm seemed to have gained sentience. He turned around and slapped, then he landed on Heaven God Transmigration's body. A look of horror came over Heaven God Transmigration's face because his body had been smashed into pieces by the palm. With a crack, it shattered into thousands of pieces. A twisted soul rushed up reluctantly. There seemed to be a supreme suction force bursting out of the arm, and Heaven God Transmigration's transmigration was immediately pulled into it. The scene that silenced everyone. The consequence of asking a tiger for its skin was the same as Heaven God Transmigration. The arm backfired and killed Heaven God Transmigration. Bufang covered Little Who's mouth with his hand. Foxy's eyes widened, and her eyes darted around. He stared into the distance. Heaven God Transmigration had disappeared, and all that was left was an arm. However, the arm gave him an unparalleled sense of crisis. Lord Go soared into the sky. Hades Era flew over in an instant and landed beside Bufang, looking solemnly at the arm in the distance. Is it over? Hades Era asked. No. It's just the beginning. Lord Go exhaled. He grew more and more serious. The shadow that the arm had cast on him had not disappeared yet. The arm hovered in midair. The broken void kept twisting it, but it could not hurt it at all. After absorbing Heaven God Transmigration's soul, the arm seemed to have come back to life. Suddenly the arm was raised. Bufang, Lord Go, and the others all tensed up. Cracks slowly appeared on the arm. That gave everyone pause. The next moment, that crack suddenly tore open and widened. Numerous scarlet eyeballs appeared on the arm, each of them spinning, and a ferocious aura emanated from them. The palm of the arm, a pair of condescending eyes stared coldly at Bufang. The look made Bufang hold his breath. Little Who was so frightened by the look that he burped. He felt that burping in this serious atmosphere was not right. So, he quickly covered his mouth with his little paw. That look, Bufang was startled, and the blood in his body seemed to flow faster. Just when everyone thought the arm was going to do something, they found that the arm had torn through the void and fled. That gave everyone pause. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. My pig trotter. Don't run! Bufang roared. The law of space swirled, tore through the void, and appeared where the arm was in a flash. Rumble, however, the speed at which the arm escaped was simply too fast. All that was left was the pair of eyeballs staring at him. Pig Trotter? All the people in the chaos space were dumbfounded. It was only later that they realized that Bufang had his eyes on the soul demon arm. Does he think the soul demon arm is an ingredient? As expected of a chef, the way he looks at his enemies is always so special. The soul demon's arm tore through the void and disappeared into it in an instant. Soon, it could no longer be seen. The void slowly healed, leaving only Heaven God Transmigration's broken body swaying in midair. Lord Go and Hades' era flew over. They were silent as they looked at the healed void. I can't believe he escaped. Hades' era smacked his lips and said, Is Heaven God Transmigration dead? He's not dead. Although he was devoured, I have an intuition that he's not dead. Lord Go said, A modern-day Heaven God would not die so easily. But it's fine. The space he tore did not lead to the chaotic universe. It should lead to another universe, Lord Go said. It's not the soul demon universe either, Bufang said. Bufang did not sense the aura of the soul demon universe. He had sealed the spatial rift, so he was familiar with that aura. Lord Go nodded. They sensed the place where the arm disappeared and found that the aura of the void was still fluctuating. This remnant aura of the universe, Lord Go seemed to be deep in thought. It seems to be that place. Bufang gave Lord Go a puzzled look. It seemed that Lord Go knew where the arm had disappeared. The last look in the arm's eyes still left a shadow in Bufang's heart. Bufang felt that he could not let the arm continue to grow wretchedly. What is that place? Bufang said. Lord Go's fat body jiggled. He glanced at Bufang and grinned. An abandoned place, Void City. Chapter 1699. Void City? The Lord Go's words gave Bufang pause, and then he furrowed his brows. He had an impression of the name. The noblewoman seemed to be from Void City. She took you with her. He did not expect to hear about Void City from the Lord Go. Lord Go, how much do you know about Void City? Bufang took a deep breath and asked the Lord Go. Void City. The Lord Go paused slightly. He did not expect that Bufang would be interested in Void City. It was a forbidden place in many universes. Many ancient heaven gods and even modern-day heaven gods were exiled to Void City. I don't know much about Void City, Lord Go. I only know that it is a very powerful place. Since ancient times, exiled ancient heaven gods and heaven gods from various universes have gathered there, the Lord Go said. There should be records about Void City in the Temple of Heaven God Space. There should be records of Void City in the Temple of Heaven God Space. You should know everything once you find it. Besides, if you want to go to Void City, you must rely on the Temple of Heaven God Space. The Temple of Heaven God Space has the most complete and detailed map of the universe in the whole chaotic universe. Bufang fell silent. Hades' era also came over. Void City. Bufang, young man, what are you going to do there? It's not a fun place. Hades' era said. You were taken away by someone. That person said she came from Void City. Bufang said expressionlessly. It seemed that Bufang had not told the Lord Go and Hades' era about this. The pupils of the Lord Go and era constricted. The cursed goddess. Void City. Are you the one chosen by the Queen of Curses? Lord Go sighed. If that was the case, things would be a little troublesome. The relationship between Void City and the chaotic universe was not very good. However, they didn't think too much about it and landed on the ground. The surroundings were in ruins, but the Temple of Heavenly God Life had been restored to its original state thanks to the Lord Go's use of the laws of time. The Lord Go glanced over. All ancient heavenly gods, god kings, and deity emperors lowered their heads in shame when he looked at them. Heaven God Transmigration had abandoned them and destroyed their worship for him. Now, these heavenly gods had chosen to submit to the heavenly time god without any reservations. What happened next was very simple. Under the pressure of the Lord Go's aura, all of the ancient races of the primordial chaos submitted. In fact, they were actually quite happy to submit to the heavenly time god. Of course, this matter definitely wouldn't end so easily. These powerful beings of the ancient race had to atone for the sins that they had committed over the countless years. As heaven god time, the Lord Go moved the river of time. They could clearly see everything that had happened in the primal chaos over countless years. The experts of the ancient race trembled in fear. As the Lord Go watched, all their sins would be seen by the Lord Go. The Lord Go was watching the river of time. The more he watched, the more unsightly his face became. These animals! The Lord Go snorted coldly, and a terrible aura spread in an instant. The god kings and god emperors felt their bodies and bodies tremble. The wrath of a heaven god was very terrifying. The reckoning of a heaven god was even more terrifying. As for how to settle the score, it had nothing to do with Bufang. In any case, Bufang could clearly sense the Lord Go's wrath. Many ancient experts were targeted by the Lord Go and thrown into the prison in the chaos space. When Heaven God Space returned, he would banish these ancient experts who had committed heinous crimes to Void City. Of course, some experts who had committed heinous crimes were directly killed by the Lord Go. Under the endless torture of the law of time, these experts directly decayed. The Temple of Heaven God Time, with the recovery of the Lord Go's cultivation base, the temple was gradually restored. Although it was not as magnificent as the Temple of Heaven God Transmigration, it still had a magnificent aura. As the first spokesperson of the Lord Go, Yuntian's status in the chaos space had also risen. Many of the almighty experts of the ancient race did not dare to offend her. The heavenly time god had completely purged all of the sins within the chaos, and the murky chaos seemed to have been restored to its former clarity overnight. The gods living in the chaos space cheered and jumped for joy. The chaos space was clear again. Next, there were more important things that the Lord Go and the others had to solve. In the depths of the Temple of Heaven God Time, there was a round stone table placed on top of it. Many figures were seated around the stone table. The stone table was very large, and the figures sitting around it were all the top experts of the chaos space. They were the Lord Go, Yuntian, Hades Era, Bufang, and some ancient heaven gods of the ancient race. The group of people sat around the table, their faces somewhat grave. They were discussing the resurrection of the other heaven god. Heaven God Transmigration has betrayed us and given up transmigration. Now there is one more causality god. There is no new heaven god who can inherit this position, so the position of heaven god in the chaos space is temporarily replaced by Bufang, the Lord Go said, glancing at the people present. As heaven god time, he was very imposing, and his aura spread across the whole place. No one dared to say anything. Bufang was a heaven god who had comprehended 5 supreme laws, and the law of transmigration was one of them, so no one had any objections. Bufang wanted to refuse. He only wanted to cook, not become heaven god transmigration. That was not his style. However, the Lord Go's words were very serious. The chaos space could not go without transmigration. Heaven God Transmigration was in charge of the cycle of life and death in the entire chaotic universe, which was very important. It was fine for a short period of time, for it had the ability to adjust itself. However, if it took too long, the cycle would collapse, and countless souls would wander the universe and turn into cosmic energy. The lives of heaven and earth would continue to decrease. Therefore, transmigration could not go without a master. Therefore, Bufang reluctantly took over. However, Bufang had said that if he found a suitable candidate, he would immediately give up the position of Heaven God Transmigration. The Lord Go nodded in agreement. There was no objection during the voting, and it was unanimously approved. Just like that, Bufang became the supreme heaven god transmigration. In addition to discussing this topic, they also discussed the return of heaven god space and heaven god destruction. Until now, no one knew where heaven god space and heaven god destruction were. That was because the two heaven gods had been sent into transmigration by heaven god transmigration, and their memories had been sealed. These two heavenly gods were slightly weaker than the heavenly time god, but not as powerful as the heavenly life god. So far, there had been no clues. Now that the Lord Go had returned, he wanted to restore the chaos space to its former glory, so he had to find the other two heaven gods. However, it was not difficult to find the two heaven god. After they were transmigrated, they might be a blade of grass or a stone. Even if they were individuals, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack to find a heaven god in the vast sea of people in the chaotic universe, billions of small worlds and countless people. According to heaven god space and heaven god destruction are very likely to be near us. Think about it, even if they are transmigrated, there should be a corresponding attraction between heaven god. Look at me and Lord Go. We are so in love, Hades Era said with a spicy strip in his mouth. Lord Go rolled his eyes. How could they be in love with each other? However, when he heard Hades Era's words, Lord Go was taken aback. Lord Go's eyes narrowed, and a glint seemed to flash across them. He glanced at Bufang, who was dozing off at the edge of the round table, and little Hu and Xiaopi, who were lying on Bufang's shoulders. If the reincarnation of the two heaven gods was related to the people around him, could it be related to Bufang? Whether it was Era or Lord Go, both had an inseparable bond with Bufang. So, they could start with Bufang. The two heaven gods were deep in thought. Yun Tianyi and many ancient experts touched their chins and nodded in agreement. Although they did not know why they were nodding, their intuition told them that it was always right to follow the heaven god's train of thought. Bufang woke up with a start and felt a chill. What are you doing? He glanced at everyone expressionlessly and felt a sense of malice. Heh heh heh, Hades Era rubbed his hands and grinned. Bufang narrowed his eyes. Why are you smiling so wickedly? Don't come to me for spicy strips for the next year. Hades Era was speechless. Lord Go told Bufang his analysis. Bufang's face was filled with suspicion. Was there such a thing? He only had little Hu, Xiaopi, and Xiao Bai left. Xiao Bai was a product of the system, so he could not be a heaven god. So, little Hu and Xiaopi were the only ones left? Could these two be heaven gods? The meeting was soon over. There were many things to be done in the chaos space. Little Hu and Xiaopi were left behind by Lord Go. He wanted to study them to see if they were the reincarnations of heaven god. As for Bufang, he walked toward the palace of heaven god transmigration under Yun Tianyi's lead. Bufang had the law of transmigration, so he quickly took over the unowned palace of heaven god transmigration. Walking in the palace, Bufang could only sigh. Heaven god transmigration had lived a good life for countless years. Yun Tianyi introduced every place in the palace to Bufang. When the door was opened, thousands of dazzling treasures were piled up like a mountain. All kinds of rare treasures were piled up in it. In the Divine Herb Pavilion, all kinds of divine herbs were flying around. The Elixir Pavilion, the library, and so on, all kinds of heaven god transmigration's treasures were now Bufang's. Why is there no food pavilion? Bufang curled his lips. Yun Tianyi did not know how to answer. Heaven god transmigration was not a chef. Why would he need a food pavilion? The two of them opened the underground palace. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The sound of Yun Tianyi's heels echoed in the empty space. A strong smell of blood assailed their nostrils. Bufang and Yun Tianyi could not help but frown. Bufang snapped his fingers, and a divine flame appeared, illuminating the whole underground palace. The scene in the underground palace was soon illuminated. Yun Tianyi and Bufang were stunned. It was a huge pool of blood, and there were also broken chains, vengeful souls floated in the air, and the corpses of heaven gods and gods kept flowing. The pool of blood had dried up, but the blood in it was still flowing. It was like a place of bondage, trapping all the vengeful souls in it. Countless vengeful souls lay at the mouth of the pool, crying silently at Yuntiani and Bufang. "This is too hateful." Yuntiani's eyes turned red. She sensed the bones and blood of many heaven gods from the Yun clan in the pool. When the Yun clan was captured by heaven god transmigration, they were slaughtered. Bufang sighed. The law of transmigration swept out and sent all the vengeful souls into the transmigration. When the vengeful souls drifted into the transmigration, they seemed to weep with joy, and their cries filled the underground palace. Bufang fell silent as he watched. The god of cooking set emerged in an instant. The rice splashed down like colored glaze. Portions of ingredients floated around Bufang's body in the underground palace. Facing the shocking pool of blood, Bufang began to cook. It was a heavy dish. At least, when Bufang cooked, it was very heavy. Ingredients flew in all directions and smoke filled the air. Bowls of glowing, glass-like dishes were placed in blue and white porcelain bowls and piled up one by one. The aroma lingered in the air, as if it had turned into a harmonious movement. It was as if a supreme being was chanting the Sanskrit to purify the resentful souls. "What is this?" Yuntiani pursed her lips and asked Bufang with a heavy heart. "This is the soul-ferrying rice," Bufang said. It was a bowl of rice that sent these souls into the transmigration to wash away the hatred in their hearts. The drifting souls were surrounded by the aroma. Prostrating before the bowls, they ate with relish, their faces filled with intoxication. The divine energy of these souls had been drained by heaven god transmigration, so they were just a bunch of invisible souls now. Without the ability to affect reality, they could only eat the soul-ferrying rice invisibly. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, Bufang exerted the law of transmigration and opened the transmigration. One by one, the souls flew into the transmigration contentedly. Suddenly, Yuntiani's eyes turned red. She raised her hand and faced the souls in front of her. The souls of a man and a woman seemed to be smiling at her with relief. After eating the soul-ferrying rice, their resentment was purified and they flew into the transmigration. After a few years, they would be alive again. "Thank you." Yuntiani wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said to Bufang. They were her parents. Their souls had been overwhelmed by hatred, but after being baptized by the soul-ferrying rice, they had regained their sanity and peacefully entered the transmigration. They would not be turned into ashes. Bufang nodded silently. Sometimes, the effect of delicious food always amazed Bufang. The soul-ferrying rice, which had suddenly appeared in his mind, made him emotional. After seeing the tragic scene, Bufang also understood how miserable the chaos space had been under Heaven God Transmigration's rule for so many years. That Heaven God Transmigration, damn it! Even if he fled to Void City, Bufang would not spare him. He would just take it as seeking justice for these souls. The two of them walked out of the underground palace. Standing in the center of the temple, Bufang finally saw the transmigration that belonged to Heaven God Transmigration for the first time. The transmigration that he had seen once before was slowly unfolding in front of Bufang like a beautiful painting. The gray transmigration wheeled in midair. Mental force slowly flowed out of Bufang's starry sky spirit sea and fused with it. For a moment, Bufang's pupils constricted. At that moment, he saw a lot. Chapter 1700. There were too many things that could be seen when one entered the cycle of reincarnation. Reincarnation could be said to be a huge cycle. When a person died, their soul would enter the cycle of reincarnation and wander in it for countless years. Their consciousness and memories would disappear, and they would return to the body and become a new person. This was the cycle of reincarnation in the chaotic universe, the foundation of endless life and death. Bufang had seen too many people's lives in the cycle of reincarnation. Reincarnation was not heartless. Instead, it was like a huge complex of emotions. All kinds of emotions were gathered in the cycle of reincarnation, fermenting and brewing as if they were about to completely explode. Bufang exited the cycle of reincarnation and couldn't help but let out a deep breath. Reincarnation made him emotional, as if his entire experience had become rich and mellow. Peeping into the cycle of reincarnation. This kind of life was not bad. Therefore, Bufang began to peep into it with relish. Xiaopi and Little Hu stood in front of Lord Go. Lord Go strode back and forth with elegant cat-like steps, his dog tail wagging. In front of him, Little Hu was half squatting on the ground, staring at Lord Go with pure and innocent eyes like precious gems, as if he didn't understand what Lord Go meant. Xiaopi was lying on the ground, blowing bubbles. Lord Go narrowed his eyes. Behind him stood Hades' Era. Era was holding a spicy strip in his mouth, calm and unruffled. The man and the dog seemed to be plotting something big. Foxy and Shrimpy, on the other hand, were confused. Little Hu, come here and sit down. Lord Go waved his paw at Little Hu. Little Hu was very obedient because she knew that this dog was not to be trifled with. The flesh on Lord Go's dog face was trembling, and he stared at Little Hu with fear. Buzz, Lord Go shook his hand, and suddenly, the power of a law appeared. It was the law of space. The silver law of space gently waved. It immediately shot out and floated around Little Hu's body. Although Lord Go was heaven god time, he also mastered other supreme laws. Of course, he was not as strong as other modern-day heaven gods. However, he was still able to control the law of space. The law of space revolved around Little Hu. Without any reaction, it finally disappeared. Lord Go narrowed his eyes. It doesn't look like it, Lord Go sighed. If Little Hu was the reincarnation of the heavenly god of space, she should be able to sense the laws of space. However, looking at Little Hu's adorable face, it was clear that the laws of space had no effect on her. As for the law of destruction, forget it. Lord Go felt that the law of destruction was even less likely to belong to Little Hu. How could this adorable creature be the reincarnation of the heavenly destruction god? How could it possibly be a terrifying brawny man who destroyed everything in his path? Lord Go couldn't accept this. Xiaopi also tried the law of space, but there was no reaction. Apart from spitting out an extra bubble, nothing else happened. Lord Go had no choice but to let them go. The two little things flew in the chaos as if they were running away. Logically speaking, heavenly god Bufang is very likely to be related to Bufang. Since it's not those two little creatures, who could it be? Even that idiot Era could be a heavenly god, so the others are more likely. It's really hard to judge. Lord Go raised a paw and scratched his head. He was so annoyed that he pulled out a few strands of dog fur. As the heavenly time god, Lord Go still had a lot of things to deal with. He naturally didn't have that much time to entertain Xiaopi and Little Hu. However, Lord Go believed that the return of the heavenly life god and the heavenly time god would be enough to affect the chaos and cause the other two heavenly gods to return. However, it would take some time. Heavenly god transmigration could be considered to have fallen. Today's chaos did not need to continue to be stagnant. Lord Go and Era used their heaven god power to open the chaos. A rumbling sound rang out. The whole chaotic universe was completely shaken at this moment. The three divine dynasties, many great worlds, countless small worlds, and some unknown continents could all feel the changes in heaven and earth. The great path of heaven and earth had become stronger, and the energy between heaven and earth had become denser. More and more geniuses were recovering like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Time passed. In the Xiai divine dynasty, thunder rumbled, and another heaven god tribulation fell. The Xiai divine emperor stood majestically between heaven and earth, transcending the heaven god tribulation with supreme power. This was the Divine Emperor's second heaven god tribulation. The lightning spread for 30,000 miles in the Divine Dynasty. With supreme divine power, the Divine Emperor broke the lightning, tore open a passage, and rushed into the chaos. He now possessed the power of an ancient heaven god. In the Divine Dynasty, Lord Go and Hades' era received him. The Xiai Divine Emperor never thought that Lord Go and Hades' era were modern-day heaven gods. He was caught off guard at that moment. In addition, the geniuses hidden in the chaotic universe began to break through one after another. Before the chaos appeared, heaven god transmigration controlled heaven and earth. Countless top god emperors failed to break through and were forcibly wiped out. Therefore, some of the most talented geniuses suppressed their cultivation bases and waited for an opportunity. Now the opportunity had come. The top god emperors who traveled in the chaotic universe broke through to the realm of saints of the Great Path, which was the level of ancient heaven gods. For a moment, the overall strength of the chaotic universe began to improve. The universe seemed to be blooming, and a majestic world suddenly descended. Time flew. Time flew. The higher one's cultivation base, the more numb they became to the passage of time. 100 years flew by in the blink of an eye. In the chaos, the temple of heaven god transmigration had taken on a new look. Outside the temple, there was a small restaurant with a long line in front of it. If anyone were here, they would be surprised to find that the people waiting outside the restaurant were all distinguished top experts of the chaotic universe. There were new heaven gods, top god emperors, and even the rulers of the ancient clans. A fat black dog was lying in front of the restaurant. No one dared to step within 3 meters of the dog. It was the same even for heaven gods. The reason was that this dog was the supreme ruler of the chaotic universe, heaven god Time. Of course, if one looked into the restaurant, a handsome man in a white robe with a spicy strip in his mouth was bragging to a large group of people. He was none other than heaven god Life, Era. A small restaurant had gathered all the supreme existences of the chaotic universe, who dared to cause trouble. The whole restaurant was extremely harmonious. Ting-a-ling. The curtain of the kitchen was pulled aside. A skinny figure slowly walked out from it. The figure was holding a blue and white porcelain bowl with golden soup swirling in it. It was a bowl of soup, stewed with dragon bones and black phoenix, a very delicious dish. The chef was none other than Bufang. He was Bufang, who was temporarily replacing heaven god transmigration. After comprehending 100 years of reincarnation, Bufang's temperament had changed greatly. He had fused his comprehension of reincarnation into his cooking, causing every dish to be extremely flavorful. 100 years had passed since Bufang's cultivation base began to improve rapidly. Not only had his cultivation base improved a lot, but his temperament had also become more stable. His cooking skills and strength had improved too quickly, so they might be a little unstable. However, 100 years of cultivation had made this concern disappear. Although he was still at the level of a saint of the Great Path, his fighting prowess was somewhat unfathomable. Bufang, young man, the renovation of the Temple of Heaven God Life has been completed. Also, I have finally found the hidden recipe. Hades' Era raised his eyebrows and said excitedly to Bufang. Bufang put down the dish in his hand. The golden soup swayed and dripped, giving off a rich aroma. Oh, Bufang nodded and wiped his hands. Give me the recipe. I've finished cooking. Come and get it, Bufang said. Hades' Era's face turned bitter. Can't you move to Ai's palace? Bufang gave him a sideways glance. I can't take that recipe out of the Temple of Heaven God Life. I will prepare the best kitchen for you with the best cooking conditions, Nether King Ha said confidently. Bufang rolled his eyes. After closing for the day, Bufang bade farewell to the regular customers in the restaurant and left with Hades' Era. Lord Go's recipe had been completed 100 years ago. At that time, it had perfected Lord Go's foundation, restored Lord Go's cultivation base to the level of a chaotic saint, and made him the strongest expert in the chaos space. Now, Hades' recipe had finally been found. He was speechless. He had spent 100 years looking for a recipe. They arrived at the Temple of Heaven God Life. Hades' had decorated the temple in a very flashy manner. All kinds of showy decorations filled the once simple and unadorned temple. Lord Go had once told Bufang that Heaven God Life was an upright and handsome man who did not like to smile. However, he did not know if his brain had gone haywire after reincarnation. Why did he become such a clown? Bufang carefully took the golden recipe from Hades' hands. Looking at the golden recipe, Bufang felt his eyes light up. His spirit sea surged with a terrifying aura. This golden menu seemed to illuminate his spirit sea as if it was daytime. Bufang had a feeling that if he could help the 5 heaven gods cook all the dishes in the recipe, he might be able to break through. The new system did not tell Bufang how to break through his cultivation base. In fact, at this level, the system could not provide much help to Bufang. Basically, Bufang had to figure out the rest by himself. Bufang, on the other hand, was to help the heaven gods cook the dishes in the recipe. Bufang had searched for Heaven God Transmigration in the Temple of Heaven God Transmigration. If he wanted to find a new recipe, he might have to wait for the new Heaven God Transmigration to appear. He recorded the contents of the golden recipe in his mind. Bufang felt countless ingredients flying around in his mind. The dishes in the golden recipe were not ordinary dishes, and the ingredients were difficult to find. It would be very difficult to succeed in one go. Naturally, he had to take it slow. Therefore, in the following days, Bufang stayed in the Temple of Heaven God Life. He began to simulate cooking at a steady pace. Hades' paced back and forth in front of the door anxiously. After all, Bufang's dish was related to his lifelong happiness. After a few years, Bufang completed the simulation. With his hands clasped behind his back, he left with Xiao Bai, Xiao Opi, and Little Hu. He roamed the primordial chaos, wandering the chaos verse in search of food ingredients. It was useless for Hades' to be anxious. He could only wait for Bufang's return every day. He had been waiting for Bufang's return. As soon as he returned, Bufang began to cook. A rumble echoed out. Countless lightning bolts gathered above the Temple of Heaven God Life. The entire chaotic universe trembled. On this day, the Lord Go, many ancient heaven gods, and the experts of the ancient clans gathered in the Temple of Heaven God Life. The changes in heaven and earth attracted their attention. Countless beams of golden light and majestic energy shot out of the Temple of Heaven God Life. The dish that Hades' had been waiting for was finally completed. Creak. A rumbling sound rang out. Behind the closed stone door of the Temple of Heaven God Life, Bufang slowly walked out of it. Everyone froze and stared at Bufang. Then, their eyes fell on Bufang's hand. In Bufang's hand, there was a golden spicy strip floating in the air. Was this the dish cooked from the golden recipe? Everyone was shocked and in an uproar. On this day, the moment Bufang finished cooking the dish, a cold light flashed in his eyes. A rumbling sound rang out. In the boundless chaotic universe, a clamor arose, and smoke billowed. Some people were shocked to discover that a dilapidated palace was slowly rising from the chaotic land. In the blink of an eye, Lord Go had appeared above the palace. Looking at the huge palace, he was stunned. The Temple of Heaven God Space? Heaven God Space hasn't returned. Why did the Temple of Heaven God Space appear first? Chapter 1701. The appearance of the Temple of Heaven God Space shocked everyone. However, it was a fact that Heaven God Space had not returned. Even the Lord Go was puzzled. Logically speaking, only when a Heaven God returned would the Temple of Heaven God Life appear, just like how had awakened and returned, leading to the return of the Temple of Heaven God Life. Bufang, on the other hand, did not mind. The appearance of the Temple of Heaven God Space surprised Bufang a little. With the appearance of the Temple of Heaven God Space, he would be able to enter it and learn something about Void City. After 100 years, Bufang had become much calmer. However, Bufang still remembered the scene of you being taken away. Bufang had promised you that he would go to Void City to find her, and now it was time to fulfill that promise. A dilapidated palace with an ancient and dilapidated aura appeared in the chaotic land without any sense of incongruity. Bufang and the Lord Go stood in front of the palace. They exchanged a glance, then stepped into the Temple of Heaven God Space without hesitation. The palace was spacious, and the air was filled with the law of space. Moreover, the law of space was stacked on top of one another, making the small space look as boundless as the sea. However, Bufang had mastered the law of space, and although the Lord Go's mastery was not strong, he knew a little about it. With a thought, the two of them pulled the space closer. As they walked through the great hall, they passed by crumbling walls and broken walls. The Temple of Heaven God Space had the most comprehensive information about the universe. This was what the Lord Go had told Bufang. He should be able to find a way to Void City in the Temple of Heaven God Space. The Lord Go told Bufang that a long time ago, it was Heaven God Space who was in charge of the banishment of the ancient heaven gods. The library was not difficult to find. The dusty stone door was pushed open, revealing the library inside. With a creak, the dust fell from the door. A man and a dog stepped into the library. Rumble. As soon as he entered, he saw a boundless starry sky. The stars in the starry sky were shining brightly. This treasure pavilion was actually a star map. Lord Go walked gracefully like a cat. He reached out his dog paw, grabbed a star in the void, and pulled it out, instantly pulling out a book. It was a thick book with a tattered cover. Lord Go flipped through the old book with his exquisite paw, then threw it aside. The book that was thrown away floated in the air, and turned back into a star. The Lord Go searched as he walked. If my memory serves me right, the books of Void City should be among these stars. Bufang said. The Lord Go said. Let's take our time. Bufang nodded. He was not in a hurry, but he had his own ways. He was the only heavenly god who had mastered 5 supreme laws of the universe. Bufang's ability could be said to have combined the abilities of 5 heavenly gods. The mental force of the starry sky spread. In front of Bufang's eyes, all the misty things disappeared in an instant, and specks of light swirled rapidly. Each star seemed to have come to life, and every breath they took contained the power of the laws. Raising his hand, Bufang's palm glowed with light. The next moment, he found a dim star. It was very dim and inconspicuous. Bufang reached out a hand and made a grabbing motion in the star. Soon, Bufang pulled out a thick book. The law of space swirled around it and formed the book. Found it. Lord Go moved his head closer and stared at the thick book in Bufang's hand. Bufang nodded and sat on the ground. Carefully, he opened the book, and the scene in front of him changed abruptly. Rumble in front of Bufang's eyes, he seemed to see a huge city floating in the starry sky. That city was built on a floating meteorite. It was a majestic city, and countless curses were wrapped around it like chains. Outside the city, there were piles of bones everywhere. There were the bones of giant dragons, the bones of winged people, and the bones of heavenly gods. There were all kinds of bones from different universes and worlds. Every one of them was emanating a vast amount of energy. There was no doubt that these corpses had been respectable people when they were alive. From a distance, the city seemed to be built on bones. The sight of it was enough to strike fear into anyone's heart. So this is Void City. Lord Dog heaved a sigh of relief, as though he wanted to release the shock in his heart. Bufang nodded. According to the noblewoman, Void City was very strong. The Queen of Void City was even stronger than a chaotic saint. Bufang was not sure if he could save you. Most importantly, the Queen of Curses of Void City hated chefs the most. Therefore, this made things a lot more difficult for Bufang. Bufang continued to flip through the book. The book was an introduction to Void City. Heaven God Space had traveled the infinite universe and recorded countless paths of stars. He must have been to Void City, the land of exile. He was, in fact, a traveler. He recorded the places he had traveled, introduced them, and evaluated them. Bufang read for a while and soon found the path of stars in the book about how to get to Void City. He needed to create an array to get there. After all, they were in different universes, so he naturally needed the help of an array to get there. The woman who took you away also came here with the help of an array. Although the array was complicated, Bufang memorized it with just a glance. Compared with the gourmet array, the complexity of this array was not a problem for Bufang. Bufang closed the book. Then, he exhaled. The book returned and turned into a stream of light. Have you really decided to go to Void City? Lord Go asked seriously, looking at Bufang. The danger of Void City was self-evident, and it was also recorded in Heaven God Space's book. For chefs, Void City was a deadly place. Chefs in Void City were almost extinct. The world is vast. It's always good to travel more. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth indifferently. The two of them left the Temple of Heaven God Space. Lord Go did not try to persuade him again. He knew what kind of place Void City was, but he also felt Bufang's determination. It was useless to persuade him. Since you want to go, you can take those ancient heaven gods, God Kings, and God Emperors who have done many evil things with Heaven God Transmigration. Lord Go thought for a moment, then gave the task to Bufang. Bufang glanced at Lord Go. This fat dog had changed. He could not believe that he was ordering him around. However, Bufang did not refuse. He needed an excuse to go to Void City. They returned to the restaurant. Bufang called Xiao Bai, Little Hu, and Xiaopi. He was going to Void City, so he brought them with him. Little Hu now had soul demon meatballs, so his strength was not weak. As for Xiaopi, he would just treat him as a mascot. The news that Bufang was going to leave soon spread throughout the chaos space. Hades Era came over with his golden spicy strip. After expressing his reluctance to part, he asked Bufang for some stock. Bufang did not refuse and gave them all to Era. Era wanted to go with him, but Bufang refused. After all, Era was now Heaven God life, and he needed to manage the chaos space. After explaining the situation to the other old customers and bidding them farewell, Bufang began to conquer. The power of the law of space swirled, and soon, he created an array that led to Void City. With Heaven God Space's array, it was easy for Bufang to create an array at his current level. Clatter, the sound of chains colliding rang out. Cold chains collided with the void. A group of exiles was brought here by the Lord Go. The eyes of these exiles were dim. When they learned that they were going to be banished to Void City, they basically despaired. As old men in the chaos space, how could they not know the horror of Void City? It was a place of no return. They had thought that since Heaven God Space had not returned, they might not be exiled. Who would have thought that this stinky chef could also take them to Void City? For a moment, these ancient heaven gods, God Kings, and God Emperors all stared hatefully at Bufang. Bufang ignored them. He took the chains and threw them to Xiao Bai. He put Xiao Bai in charge of these exiles, while he continued to draw the array. In today's chaos space, no one dared to claim to be the best in the comprehension of the law of space, except Bufang. With Bufang's creation, the teleportation array gradually took shape in the Temple of Heaven God Space. Then, Bufang took out many minerals and crystals. These crystals could provide a vast amount of energy, enough for Bufang to complete a cosmic jump. Many people in the chaos space were watching. They felt it was a pity that Bufang had to leave. After all, Bufang's food was too delicious. However, they were also excited about the opening of the path to Void City. This meant that the once glorious chaotic universe was about to return. Rumble. Countless strands of energy gathered and soon turned into a beam of light that shot into the sky. The array rotated and emitted a dazzling light. Then, a loud rumble rang out. Accompanied by the rotation of the array, the beam of light rushed into the chaos space. The chaos space twisted and turned into a twisted entrance. The entrance was deep and full of terrible destructive power. However, Bufang knew that it led to Void City. He patted Xiao Bai's belly. Bufang glanced at Lord Go, Hades' Era, and the others, then nodded. The faces of the crowd were somewhat solemn as they watched Bufang leave. The next moment, Bufang took a step forward. The law of space spread under his feet and he rose into the sky. Rumble. Like a stream of silver light, he flew into the twisted space in a flash. With a tug of Whitey's fan-like palm, those exiled people immediately staggered and were pulled into the entrance. Many of them cried and did not want to go. However, their cries were eventually swallowed by the light. Buzz, the beam of light faded away. The chaos space returned to calm. The crowd was in a trance. They looked at the void in silence. Lord Go sighed. Bufang has left. It's going to be a long time before I can eat sweet and sour ribs again. Hades' Era was a little depressed. It seemed that he would have to eat spicy strips sparingly. I hope Bufang boy can rescue Nethery safely, he murmured. Lord Go sighed. It's not that easy. It's not like you don't know the tempers of those people in Void City. They have never been kind to our chaotic universe. Hades' Era held a spicy strip between his lips. Although they did not say it, they were actually worried about Bufang. The teleportation of the array was very fast. Traveling from one universe to another was a very uncomfortable thing. Even with Bufang's fleshly body, he could feel the powerful pressure of the power of space. He did not know how long the discomfort lasted. Finally, Bufang broke free from the discomfort. Clatter, the sound of chains colliding rang out. Behind him, Whitey's metal wings were spread, and it was dragging a group of exiles with it, dragging a chain behind it. These people looked terrified as they stared at Bufang. He raised his hand and sensed the universe where Void City was. Rumble, his mental force spread and filled a boundless distance in an instant. Bufang paused. It was a dilapidated and dead universe. The stars in the starry sky were basically broken and lifeless. Between the stars there were many ancient starry sky ships traveling. There seemed to be existences as strong as saints of the Great Path sitting on each of them. In the center of Bufang's mental force, there a huge, magnificent city floated in the starry sky. It shook the whole universe and plundered all the energy in it. Outside the city, corpses were everywhere. This was Void City. Bufang's mental force sensed the city from a great distance. Suddenly, all of a sudden, a terrible mental pressure exploded out of Void City. The pressure made Bufang's expression flicker. How dare you spy on Void City in this universe? You're courting death. An extremely powerful mental force followed the trajectory of Bufang's mental force and shot toward Bufang with killing intent. Wherever the mental force passed, the ancient ships exploded. Chapter 1702. Rumble. The mental force seemed to have turned corporeal, turning into a wave of energy that shot toward Bufang at high speed from a distance. Wherever it passed, stars crumbled, and ancient ships exploded in an instant. Even the wreckage of many stars was destroyed and turned into dregs. The terrible power was frightening. It was not weaker than the power of a chaotic saint. Moreover, the level of its mental force seemed to be even higher. Bufang's expression changed. The mental force made him feel a sense of crisis. Rumble. In his spirit sea, the artifact spirits roared, and the array of 4 quadrants was formed in an instant. The terrible mental force turned into an invisible palm and slapped down toward Bufang. The stars went dark in an instant, and the palm was the only thing left in the starry sky. Boom! Bufang's mental force formed a defensive force and blocked the palm like a shield. The palm fell, causing the whole starry sky to tremble. Bufang's face turned pale. It was a long time before the fluctuation of the mental force faded away. How overbearing! What a void city! Bufang ate an oyster pancake. The warm energy made Bufang's mental force feel as if it was bathing in the energy of the sun, causing his mental force to recover. At this moment, the minor mental injuries he had suffered were completely healed. However, Bufang now had a clear understanding of this Void City. Void City was overbearing and unreasonable. It was the overlord of this universe. It attacked at the slightest disagreement. The mental force that burst out of the city just now should be the attack of a chaotic saint. Perhaps Bufang did not expect that he would be killed before his mental force could enter the city. If it were any other saint of the Great Path but not Bufang, that person would have been killed. Even a saint of the Great Path would face a slow death if his mental force collapsed. The person who attacked was neither the noblewoman nor the Queen of Curses. If it were the Queen of Curses, Bufang might not have a chance to resist. According to the noblewoman, the Queen of Curses should be in existence beyond the level of a chaotic saint. Bufang turned his head. Behind him, the exiled ancient gods, god kings, and god emperors all knelt in the starry sky, trembling in fear. That exchange, just now, had scared them badly. A man's name is like a tree's shadow. The terror of Void City had long been etched in their minds. It was a place where people were eaten without spitting out the bones. Even an ancient heavenly god would die here. Please spare us. An ancient heavenly god begged Bufang for mercy. However, Bufang just glanced at him coldly. After 100 years of reincarnation, Bufang came to know many things. These people's hands were stained with evil, and even death could not wash away their sins. Those people immediately stopped talking. However, all of them had looks of despair on their faces. Bufang turned to look at Void City again. With a thought, the law of space enveloped everyone. In an instant, a silver light flashed, and they disappeared. After a long time, a stream of black energy rolled over, and countless stars were twisted and shattered. The black energy dissipated. A huge black dragon emerged in midair. It looked very ferocious, somewhat similar to the divine dragons in the myths of the primitive universe. However, terrible power flowed through its body. It turned out to be a black dragon who had reached the level of a saint of the Great Path. The black dragon opened its mouth. A black chain stretched out of it and was pulled by someone's hand. There was a figure standing on the back of the black dragon. It was a woman wearing an ugly devil mask. Her figure was voluptuous, and her aura was extremely fearsome. However, the mask was twisted, and it gave off a nightmarish feeling. "You ran so fast." The woman's voice was hoarse, grinding the air like a sandstone. She reached out a hand, which was slender and fair. Then, she made a grabbing motion in the void. The law of space of the chaotic universe. Have the people of the chaotic universe opened another passage to Void City? However, I can't believe you dared to spy on Void City. You're lucky to run away this time. A sneer seemed to come over the face under the mask. Then, she grabbed the dragon's horn and gave it a hard pull. The black dragon let out a dragon roar. With a twist of its body, it disappeared into the void, turned into a plume of black smoke, and sped toward Void City in a flash. In a place far away from Void City, Bufang landed with a group of people. Some of them were already tortured by the oppressive atmosphere and wanted to flee. However, they were all slapped back by Xiaobai. Today, Xiaobai could fight a saint of the Great Path head-on, so these god kings and god emperors were no match for him. "Xiaobai, let them go. They are exiles, and being here is basically the same as being exiled," Bufang said. Xiaobai's mechanical eyes flashed, and he nodded as if he understood. Buzz, on Whitey's back, a flag suddenly soared into the sky and instantly fell down. With a poochie sound, it cut the chain into pieces. The faces of these people were wild with joy. They shot out in all directions at a rapid speed. They wanted to escape from here. Bufang's face was indifferent as he watched them leave. Escape? The whole universe is under the control of Void City, and these people can't escape. Bufang shook his head. Just now, when he released his mental force, he could sense that there were countless ancient ships in all directions around Void City. Each of them was burdened with a monstrous aura of blood and looked ferocious. Their purpose was to capture and kill these exiles. Sure enough, the moment these people fled, Bufang found that the ancient ships, which had been quietly floating in the starry sky, began to move. Rumble! Ancient starship after ancient starship flew over from the starry sky and chased after the exiles who were fleeing. Bufang narrowed his eyes and clasped his hands behind his back. He could clearly see bony claws falling from the ancient ship and grabbing those who were trying to flee. An ancient heaven god unleashed his divine power to fight back. Then, he collided with the bone claws. In the blink of an eye, the bone claws in the ancient ship were completely shattered. However, this seemed to have angered the expert in the ship. A roar rang out. In an instant, monstrous black smoke billowed into the sky. Many ancient starry sky ships flew over and surrounded the expert in an instant. Slash! Slash! One black chain after another shot out and instantly pierced the expert with thousands of holes. Those white-boned ships were like greedy demons, constantly dragging these people into the ancient starry sky ship. Slash! Slash! The experts who were dragged into the ancient starry sky ship turned into skeletons one after another. In the end, they became members of the ancient starry sky ship. This is the power of the curse. Bufang could not help but click his tongue. He could sense the curse power flowing in those ancient ships. It was these curses that made these ancient ships keep chasing these exiles. Buzz, one ancient ship after another aimed at Bufang. Bufang's eyes narrowed. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. The flag behind him clanked, and a metal spear appeared in his hand. Boom! One ancient ship after another shot toward him at high speed. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes lit up as he slammed the flag down. The spear shot out. One ancient ship after another exploded, and countless white bones flew in all directions. Let's go. Bufang couldn't help but frown as he looked at the densely packed ancient ships that kept coming. There was no end to these ancient ships. Xiao Bai landed next to Bufang. On his shoulders, Xiaopi and Little, who were holding Bufang's head. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Silver light exploded under his feet. The law of space erupted, and he disappeared in a flash. Now that the ancient ships had lost their target, the skeletons on them drifted in the starry sky in confusion. The law of space flickered. Bufang landed in front of the huge void city. He raised his head and looked up sharply. Bufang felt his body convulse. From a distance in the starry sky, it did not look like much. However, it was only when he got closer that he realized how big Void City was. It was just a door, but it almost spanned the whole universe. He could not see the end of it. Standing in front of the door, Bufang looked as small as a speck of dust. It's so huge. Bufang sighed with emotion. Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he was still shocked. There was a description of Void City in Heaven God Space's record. However, there was still a huge gap between seeing it with his own eyes and describing it. There were no guards in Void City. Bufang took Xiao Bai and flew into it. Behind the door was a long bridge that stretched as far as the eye could see and was filled with curses. The bridge looked like the spine of a demon, stretching as far as the eye could see. Rumble! A black stream of water flowed under the bridge and rushed into the city like a waterfall. It was shrouded by a pervading mist, bringing with it a mournful and sorrowful aura of death. Black curse snakes could be seen slithering in the water. Bufang could feel that he could not fly above the stream of water. Once he did, he would very likely be devoured and pulled into the water by those restless cursed snakes. The curse and corrosive power in the water terrified even Bu Fong. The bridge was really long. Even with Bu Fong's speed, it took him several days to reach the end. Finally, he set foot on the land of the city. Void City was a city that floated in the universe. It was the largest city in all the universes. It was larger than a planet and vaster than a divine dynasty. Dark steel buildings towered into the sky. Fortunately, there was no longer the terrifying power of the curse when they reached land. Poof! Poof! Bu Fong turned around. There were still many cursed snakes slithering out of the black water, their eyes fixed on Bu Fong. Bu Fong stepped into the city. It was a very vast city. The place where Bu Fong was standing was only a corner of the city. There were many buildings and houses, including high-rise buildings and low-rise houses. Bu Fong glanced around. The people in the city were filled with the aura of death, staring at Bu Fong with lifeless eyes. As a stranger, Bu Fong came to the city. In these people's eyes, they did not show any emotion. They had no feelings for Bu Fong. Bu Fong was too lazy to pay attention to them. For the next few days, Bu Fong walked around the city. It was a simple city, but it was filled with the aura of death at all times. Here, Bu Fong could see killings at will. Anyone in the city had the strength of a god, and it was no weaker than the chaotic realms in the chaotic universe. A few days passed. Bu Fong learned that he was only in a small corner of Void City. The city was divided into 4 districts: A, B, C, and D. Bu Fong was in District D. District D was the most destitute and chaotic part of the city. It was full of killings and death, and countless people were fighting for resources to survive. The people in District D were basically those who had been exiled by various universes. They had escaped the ancient starship and hid in the outermost region of Void City, struggling at death's door. These people's bodies were all surrounded by the power of the curse, and they were suffering from the torture of the curse. He narrowed his eyes and released the god of cooking's eye. He could see the curse aura emanating from these scrawny men, which floated up and gathered in the outermost layer of the black river of curse. Void City was a place full of evil and sin. At the thought of you living in such a place, Bu Fong's heart skipped a beat. He did not need to think to know that this was a city full of competition. Failing in the competition would mean death. Perhaps, I'll have to speed up my search for you, Bu Fong thought to himself seriously. Suddenly, the sky above District D suddenly darkened. Bu Fong narrowed his eyes, raised his hand, and suddenly found that there was a wriggling cursed snake on his arm, flicking its tongue at him. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.